Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook, Wizards of the Marvel Universe. Chapter 61. After hanging up the phone, the atmosphere in the car, which was full of laughter and chatter, suddenly became very quiet. Susan's faint sobbing sound burst out from the car. Just now, she heard the sound of her brother's bones breaking. Although Jonathan was naughty and caused a lot of trouble for his family, blood is thicker than water after all. And no matter what, he is still her family. How could Susan bear the pain of her family being tortured? Yan Chen breathed a sigh of relief. Then he pulled Susan, who needed comfort, into his arms and gently patted her soft back. Okay, I'm here. Yan Chen tried to comfort the beauty in his arms in the most gentle voice. Suddenly, she entered the warmest embrace. Feeling the familiar body temperature and light words, Susan's tense expression just now gradually relaxed, and her sobbing also eased. Tell me, where is he? Yan Chen said again gently. Jonathan, Doom, we have captured the headquarters of Fengdu Group. And he wants us to rescue people, and not to call anyone. Susan explained the matter in a discontinuous manner. Her originally sweet voice was choked and hoarse. And in the driver's seat, Helen's delicate face was shocked. Through the rearview mirror inside the car, she could see Yan Chen's sudden change. His clear eyes suddenly turned into a pair of strange golden vertical pupils. His strong arms were actually vibrate. That's right. Vibrate. It was as if he was suppressing something in his body that was about to explode. His face was tense and uncomfortable, but he was still able to speak kindly and soothe the woman in his arms with the most gentle voice of a lover. Okay, I will bring him back intact, Yan Chen said softly. Then, he raised his head slightly, and his golden pupils could not help but look at each other through the rearview mirror. Even if it was just a glance, Helen felt a chill inexplicably rising in her spine, and her heart seemed to be suddenly seized and beat slowly. What a terrifying momentum! But the next second, my sight suddenly blurred. The tall figure in the rearview mirror suddenly disappeared from the air. Crackle, crackle. The sound of firewood burning in the flames continued to be heard, and the magical fluctuations of the apparition spread again. Suddenly, a figure appeared out of thin air in the headquarters of the Fengdu Group in New York after a ripple in the air. Click! The sound of footsteps spread in the building. The whole building was deserted and looked lonely. Click! Along with a series of fine footsteps, the sound of bones came out of Yan Chen's body. Chi chi chi! There was a smell of burning fireworks in the air, and the whole ground was covered with small flames. This was Yan Chen. The anger that Yan Chen had suppressed for a long time was completely aroused. His lover was not in his arms, so he didn't need to endure it anymore. Click! Another step down. With each step of Yan Chen, he stepped lightly on the ground, and his momentum continued to rise. Before he had completely walked down a short distance, the dragon blood lurking in his body had been fully revived. He raised his right leg slightly, ready to take the next step on the ground. But at this moment, his figure disappeared in the hall of the building. Because during the time he took these few steps, he had already searched the exact location through the Phoenix Soul. Outside the door of a chairman's office, a gust of wind suddenly appeared out of thin air on the ground, and with a click, the footstep that Yan Chen had not taken just now suddenly landed here. Buzz! The magic floating cloak swayed slowly on Yan Chen's back, making some sounds like a flag. Click! Another footstep. Yan Chen's figure had already come to the door one step away, and a black magic wand suddenly slipped out of his right sleeve and fell steadily into his palm. Then, the whole door opened automatically without wind, with a buzzing sound, and suddenly opened completely. This subtle movement immediately attracted the attention of the people in the office. Seeing the person coming, although Dum's face was puzzled by the speed so fast, his voice was still full of joy. Great, you're here. I was worried that you wouldn't come, but you were alone. Didn't you call the police? Doom said with great joy. His eyes were filled with excitement. But before he could finish his words, he suddenly found that his lips were stuck together tightly, making it impossible for him to say a word. Well, with his mouth tightly shut, he could only utter sobs. This strange change made Doom panic. Looking at the young man holding a magic wand in front of him, he felt as if he had seen a ghost. He couldn't help but feel that his understanding of this young man was wrong. But this panic also prompted Doom to take further action. He spread his arms and hands, ready to draw the terrifying electric current from the entire building. But, hanging upside down, a calm voice suddenly burst out from Yan Chen's mouth. Then, Dumu felt his vision spinning around, and then suddenly his head was upside down, and his legs were like being tied up, and he was completely nailed to the air. Well, such a strange movement made his head feel heavy and his vision blurred. The momentum in his hands dissipated instantly, and the power control he was so proud of was lost. There is no shadow. Another plain voice sounded. Whoosh! A gust of wind suddenly bloomed in the ear, and then a hideous bloodline appeared on the ear. Pain! Dumb roared in his heart. But at this moment, whoosh! A drum noise sounded in his ears, and an inexplicable storm suddenly lingered around him. The wind was like an invisible blade, constantly slashing his entire body. Clang! The sound of metal colliding kept ringing. Puff! After completely breaking through his metal surface, bloodlines continued to appear all over his body. The wounds were very hideous and exaggerated, and all of them were completely broken. His proud metal body was not worth mentioning under the storm formed by the shadowless god. In a blink of an eye, he had completely gone through the bloody baptism of Ling Qi, and there was no intact skin on his body, just like a bloody man. Perhaps he couldn't bear the force of repeated slashing. Dum's entire high-hanging body fell to the ground. Da! Footsteps sounded in his ears, and Yan Chen had come close to him. After one foot landed, Yan Chen had come close to him. In the corner of the room in front of him, Jonathan's body was lying, with many red and swollen injuries on his body. It was obvious that he had fainted due to severe pain. After checking that his life was not in danger, Yan Chen slowly raised one foot, and then with a wheezing sound, he stepped down heavily. With a snap, Doom's entire right elbow was instantly broken by him. The dragon power in Yan Chen's body was more than that. With a slight force, the bones that were originally as high and thick as a fist were instantly flattened and dented. Ah! A wail came out of Dum's mouth instantly. The two lips that were originally tightly attached were cut apart by the invisible blade, causing him to make a heart-wrenching sound. But Yan Chen didn't care. A pair of strange golden vertical pupils flashed with creepy murderous intent, and a slight arc was drawn at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Dum's other hand still trying to gather electricity, but smiled. Whoosh! Another whistling sound that broke through the air suddenly came out. Ah! The entire left hand joint was instantly broken by him again. Doom's face was full of pain, and his vision was bloodshot. He could only see the figure standing in front of him vaguely. Perhaps because of the blurred vision of seeing flowers in the fog, he actually saw a vague animal shadow from the figure, as if the person in front of him was actually a monster. Even if he wasn't, but with the weird magic just now, how could this guy still be a human? Ah! Doom couldn't bear the severe pain in his body, and another mouthful of blood foam spurted out of his mouth. Monster! You! Still human! Doom spat out a lot of blood, and then he finished the sentence incoherently. At first, he thought that this guy was just a good fighter with some Chinese kung fu. But he didn't act rashly, so he was very happy to get rid of the lizard beast to prove himself. But he didn't expect that the lizard beast that frightened New York and made many superheroes return in defeat couldn't withstand his attack. This gave him a strong self-confidence. He thought Susan's boyfriend was just like that. So, after easily beating up Jonathan, the young man, he called Susan and prepared to catch them all in one fell swoop. He also arrived as promised. But he didn't expect this as the result. Bang! Yan Chen stepped down hard again, breaking Doom's spine in two. Ah! Dum screamed in pain. He had no idea how to fight back. He thought everyone was just a frog in the well, and Yan Chen was just a frog in the well that was jumping a little bit. But it turned out that I am the most pitiful frog in the well, drilling my heart and tearing my bones out. Yan Chen's faint voice came from his mouth. Then Doom, who had been motionless like a dead body just now, began to shake violently like a salted fish just landed. His heart felt like it was being cut by a knife, and his bones felt like they were being gnawed, full of bone-eating pain. Ah! Doom, who had almost fainted from the pain, woke up again. Then a footprint was imprinted on his head. Feeling the intense force, the ground below his head began to break and sink. The dying Doom couldn't help but cry out, "No!" Yan Chen ignored him, and the power of his legs gushed out. Crack! The entire huge, metallic head was instantly crushed by him like a watermelon, and a red and white turbid substance suddenly filled the hole under the body. Looking at this corpse that was no longer in human form, the anger in Yan Chen's body was slightly relieved. After all, when he saw Susan's delicate face that was sad and beautiful just now, he felt like he was going to explode. When had he seen Susan, who always had a sweet smile, so sad and lost? In order to comfort her, Yan Chen even tried his best to suppress the anger in his heart, and then he came here with peace of mind. Looking at this culprit, he fell down and died completely. Yan Chen breathed a sigh of relief, and then raised his right hand, and a faint green light gushed out of the black magic wand, and completely fell on Jonathan on the ground. The wound heals. A gentle spring breeze swept by, like spring coming out of winter, and the whole air was filled with the breath of recovery. The bruises and wounds on Jonathan's body that had been burned by the electric current just now disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. His strength gradually recovered, and his eyelids were trembling. I think he will wake up for this. Suddenly, Kai, the temperature in the air kept rising inexplicably, and a crimson flame instantly appeared on Doom's body. His entire body was like a burning candle, quickly melting away. It's time to go, Yan Chen thought to himself. If he stayed here any longer, Susan would suffer even more. So he grabbed Jonathan by the collar. Hey, who are you? With his panicked shout, the magic spell of apparition was completely activated. Crackling, the figures of the two people completely disappeared from here, and only Jonathan's exaggerated shouting was still transmitted in the building. At this time, at the other end, Helen drove the Mercedes-Benz and slowly appeared at the street entrance of the community. After turning a corner, she found that there were two tall figures standing in the duplex apartment in front. This, Helen screamed, and the car quickly drove to the gate of the yard. Bang! The car door opened impatiently, and the worried Susan immediately jumped into Yan Chen's arms like a swallow flying into the forest. Are you okay? Susan's trembling voice came. The remaining anger in Yan Chen's body suddenly dissipated. He couldn't help but hug Susan tightly and whispered in her ear, "It's okay. It's just an ant." After hearing this, Susan couldn't help but chuckle. Dumb, the chairman of the Fangdu Group and the pride of New York, was actually described by him as an ant. But it was very vivid. Hey, stop showing off your love in front of me, Jonathan said flatteringly with a smile. At this time, Susan, who was smiling, suddenly tightened her face, and turned to scold her brother and said, "How dare you say that? What did you do tonight? Not only did you make us worried, but if Dad and the others knew about it, you would scare them to death." Then a series of words of instruction came out in a crackling sound. Jonathan could only stand there in a daze, feeling very embarrassed. Seeing Susan's style as a sister, Yan Chen couldn't help but laugh. After Susan had scolded him, she let Jonathan go home after seeing that he was fine. Not long after she finished speaking, Jonathan, who seemed to have been pardoned, flew straight up to the sky like a torch. This is the origin of the name of Thunderbolt. Fire immune constitution. Able to produce ultra-high temperature flames, able to fly and shoot flames. In general, it is somewhat similar to part of Yan Chen's ability. After all, under the shaping of the Phoenix soul, he also has a constitution that is immune to fire. But the better point is that he can also transform himself into a fire element, and he is not an ordinary flame, but a Phoenix fireworks. Difficult to extinguish. Corrosive properties. Ignite out of thin air. This is the superiority of Phoenix fireworks. Of course, Phoenix Fox's tears are a medical panacea. As long as he has not completely swallowed his last breath, there is a possibility of saving him. However, Yan Chen didn't have the time, let alone the mood to cry, so he didn't prove it, but the turbid liquid that flowed out of him had the effect of keeping the face young and youthful. This can be proved by Susan's body. Back to the duplex apartment. After a series of ups and downs in Susan's mood, she didn't feel like talking after taking a bath. After a night, she followed Yan Chen back to the master bedroom. After all, she had just encountered a disaster, so of course she needed to talk to her closest people. Helen could understand. After all, last night, she and Susan talked a lot about their concerns, but when she thought of the two people living together in the bedroom, she felt a little lonely and lost. Thinking of Yan Chen tonight, she couldn't sleep after showing the tip of the iceberg of his magic. The night was long. There was a lot of fighting over there. But it was quiet here. Everyone, with their own thoughts, finally fell into a deep sleep. Soon, dawn was breaking. A new day had arrived as promised. Yan Chen, lying on the couch, lazily opened his eyes. The beauty had just left the couch. There was still a trace of body temperature in her broad embrace, and the air was even filled with Susan's pleasant body fragrance. Ha! Yan Chen breathed a sigh of relief and stretched himself. Snap! He put on his soft slippers, but Yan Chen, who was uncomfortable all over, was a little worried because his clothes were not on the ground. After the two returned to the room, they turned the entire bedroom into a battlefield, so he couldn't find his clothes for a while. Fortunately, people who are forgetful and absent-minded need the most essential magic. Clothes. Fly here, Yan Chen whispered. Soon, a white shirt hanging under the windowsill fell into the palm of his hand. After dressing and washing, Yan Chen slowly came to the living room on the first floor. Helen had woken up a long time ago. Her delicate and pretty face was full of solemn and serious expressions. She was sitting on the sofa reviewing relevant research documents. Susan put on a pink apron and was carefully making lunch in the kitchen. After watching Yan Chen coming down the stairs, Susan's face was filled with a sweet smile. She waved to him and said, "Good morning." Helen's mind also woke up from the research documents. Looking at the young man in front of her who exuded an extraordinary temperament, she was full of curiosity and wanted to say something. After collecting the complicated emotions in her mind, Helen also smiled and said, "Good morning." "You too. Of course, that includes you," Yan Chen said to Kelly. After this proud owl got in touch with the hostess, he was no longer so clingy to Yan Chen. But it was no wonder that this foodie wanted to eat from morning till night. "Today, go find a Horcrux for me. Otherwise, the food will be halved." Yan Chen, who knows all kinds of animal languages, said this to her directly. Goo 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 goo. Kelly nodded slightly aggrievedly. The reduction of food by half would undoubtedly cost her life. So far, only 2 Horcruxes have been recovered. There are still 4 Horcruxes that have not been discovered. Moreover, through the fluctuations of her own soul and Kelly's long-term exploration, it is very likely that they are not in this land. And Yan Chen already knew the location of the Horcrux that had been discovered. It happened to be in an underground base strictly guarded by S.H.I.E.L.D. Although he didn't know what it was, he could see that it was a very important thing given the degree of its strictness. And it was very likely that a piece of his soul fragment was just residing in this important treasure. This is quite interesting, Yan Chen couldn't help thinking. After all, the ancient monster magic floating cloak could choose him as its master, and it is also very likely that the soul fragment became a Horcrux after it was inhabited. In this way, the things hidden in S.H.I.E.L.D. are a bit intriguing. But he is not in a hurry. After all, the Horcrux can ensure his immortality, so it does not mean that all of them must be recovered and swallowed. Therefore, it is still necessary to keep 1 or 2 Horcruxes. Of course, the most important thing is that he has to figure out where the other Horcruxes are placed. And are they safe? As for the Horcrux hidden in the underground base of S.H.I.E.L.D., there is no hurry at all. First, because someone helps him guard it for free, it is extremely safe. Second, the absorption of soul fragments does not play a big role in his current strength growth. Now, only the power of the ancient gods can make his strength leap to the next higher level. So, if what he expected was correct, he would definitely get the classic of white magic, the Book of Vishanti, which happened to be hidden in the library of Kamaji Mahal. What's more, he had read the entire book in the past. Yan Chen has already put the study of the power of the Vishanti Trinity on his agenda. After the incident last night, he forgot to let them take the human enhancement potion. But tonight, Yan Chen plans to make them both completely reborn. And after what happened last night, Susan has paid more attention to her special abilities. This can be considered a reward, right? Yan Chen sighed. At this time, there was a knock on the door. Yan Chen came back to his senses, and after his phoenix divine sense spread out, he saw a man wearing strange glasses and a woman with long red hair standing outside his door. Still a power owner. Susan hummed a lyrical tune, wrapped in a pink apron, holding a shovel in her hand, and happily opened the door. Click. Outside the door, Scott, who had red glasses and cyclops eyes, and Jean Grey, who had a good-looking face and a plump and tight figure, immediately caught the eye of the girl who opened the door. So beautiful, Scott couldn't help but admire her loyally in his heart. After all, with this delicate face like an angel and a sweet smile, basically no one could resist this charm. Even Jean Grey's eyes were rippling, which could make her, who was also very beautiful, feel gorgeous, which also indirectly explained Susan's beauty. Just as they were stunned, Susan asked in confusion, "Who are you looking for?" Jean Grey came back to her senses, and a dignified and beautiful temperament appeared on her face. She said in a gentle tone, "Excuse me, is Dr. Zhao Helen at home?" Well, looking for Helen. Susan's face was full of doubts. After all, not many people knew that Helen had moved into her house. Besides, the glasses the man in front of her wore were too strange. At this time, Helen also came over from the living room after hearing the noise outside. Looking at the two strangers in front of her, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous and alert. After all, the lesson from the past was still in her mind. But when she thought that there was a magician with unfathomable strength in the house, her whole expression relaxed. "Who are you?" Helen asked tentatively, seeing the real protagonist appear. Scott and Jean Grey once again felt the gorgeous charm of the woman. If Susan, the blonde sweet girl, represents Western beauty, then the woman with a gentle temperament in front of them interprets another extreme Eastern temperament. The fact that two beauties can live in this house is simply enviable. Scott took a breath and said, "Hello, Dr. Helen. Excuse me, we are ex-cops. After receiving the report from S.H.I.E.L.D., we are here to bother you." Ex-cops. Helen then remembered what Coulson said that night. It seemed that there was indeed such a thing. Thinking of this, the last trace of hesitation in her heart disappeared. However, you are mutants too. Susan seemed to have heard of this organization vaguely. In order to dispel their doubts, Jean Grey stepped forward and said, "Yes. But we are not a terrorist organization like the Brotherhood. On the contrary, we have been working hard to eliminate the threat of social instability." After all, the Brotherhood of Mutants is too notorious, so Jean Grey did not solemnly distance herself from it. "I see," Helen responded. After all, it was recommended by S.H.I.E.L.D., so she felt more or less trustworthy. Scott then said, "We are sorry for what happened to you last night. But we have reason to believe that the Brotherhood's actions are not just this. Prior to this, the Brotherhood completely kidnapped Senator Kelly. Life or death is uncertain. And now, they have set their sights on you. Although the reasons involved are still unknown. Moreover, the Brotherhood's actions this time were so high profile that it was very likely to be another terrorist attack that would affect the entire world. Those people will not give up, so if possible, Dr. Helen can temporarily move to Charles School for the Gifted and accept the protection of our ex-police." The phone call was not finished yet. "I refuse." A light word interrupted his long speech. Steck was stunned for some reason and stopped talking, but he saw a figure coming to the entrance of the house. Is this a man? Considering the layout of one man and two women in the house, it would make people feel like flying together and enjoying the blessing of two people. Scott inexplicably felt a little jealous in his heart, but he still concealed his emotions very well and said, "Who are you?" "I am the male owner here," Yan Chen said lightly, "and I already know your intention." "Rejected. Okay, you can go back." The straightforward tone did not allow for any negotiation. It was simply an announcement that they had come to persuade him and ruthlessly close the door. After hearing this, Scott couldn't help but feel a little emotional, especially when he thought that this man might have rejected his request just for his own selfish desires. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but speak a little heavier. "This is an incident involving a national terrorist attack, so." "Terrorist attack? None of my business." Yan Chen interrupted his righteous words. He was not a saint, so why should he help if something happened? "You." Hearing his nonchalant words, Scott suddenly felt angry. Okay, he said, "Okay," 3 times in a row, looking very exasperated. But then he changed the subject. "The Brotherhood of Mutants will not stop here, they are likely to attack again. Can you stop them? You can disregard national justice and reputation. But when it comes to your own personal safety, you will probably be scared to death. Come on, show your bad nature as a commoner." Scott thought to himself, and he couldn't help but feel happy in his heart, ready to catch a trace of panic on his face. But he was wrong. This guy's expression was not moved at all, and he still had that indifferent attitude. Doesn't he watch some news? Doesn't he know the reputation of the Brotherhood of Mutants? He doesn't know that even the powerful people who hold power are just dogs to them, and they can kill them at will. At this time, Yan Chen smiled and said, "If you dare to come, I will also help Helen's revenge." This peaceful word immediately made Helen's heart tremble, and a sweet taste emerged in her heart. Scott over there saw this scene and was very furious. Could this guy be horny? A man who acts completely with his lower body. It stands to reason that with the tall and upright figure of the man in front of him, he is enough to be a quarterback in American football, but mutants are not comparable to humans in terms of physique. They are terrifying people with abilities. After a long time, he responded, "You don't know how terrifying the Brotherhood is. Have no idea. Anyway, all I know is that killing them is like killing dogs." Yan Chen responded calmly. Killing them is like slaughtering dogs. This sentence was plain, but it was undoubtedly a bolt from the blue in Cyclops Scott's ears. The Brotherhood of Mutants, which had been a scourge to the world for decades, turned out to be a bunch of chickens and dogs in his mouth. Ha ha. After a long while, Scott came back to his senses, as if he had heard a good joke, and laughed straight. This is simply the funniest joke in the world. Just as he turned around and was about to share this joke with Chin Gele beside him, he saw that her expression was very tense, as if she was facing a great enemy, and she was a little nervous, which was completely different from his relaxed and funny expression. What's going on? Could it be that Chin Gele believed this guy's pretentious words? At this time, Yan Chen was also slightly moved and shocked, looking at Chin Gele on the side, with a waist-length red hair that was as red as fire, and a dignified and gentle temperament on her delicate and pretty face. This is a common teacher's temperament, but it is exuded vividly on her face. Wearing a red dress, although it is tight, it can't hide the slender and graceful concave and convex figure underneath. The curvature of the material of the clothes alone is enough to make people imagine. If it were just such a beautiful woman, it would not be enough to move Yan Chen so much. After all, there were two of them standing behind him. What shocked him a little was the faint fluctuations in the woman's soul, which was obviously the fluctuation of the Phoenix's divine mind. Compared to herself, although it was weak and vague, like a candle in the wind, it seemed to dim and extinguish at any time. But the potential hidden underneath was extremely terrifying, and the desolate and lonely momentum was no more than that of the power of the ancient gods. However, this terrifying Phoenix power was artificially blocked by a mental fence, so that the degree of her acceptance was much weaker, but at the same time it also prevented the power from expanding too much. It was simply incredible, but at this moment, a slight wave was transmitted from her body. At the same time, Yan Chen's Phoenix soul could not help but ripple, receiving the wave transmitted from the outside world. Although this wave seemed to have the same origin and was very similar, the magnificent momentum contained in it was better than his own Phoenix divine mind. But this wave was perfectly integrated into his Phoenix soul, and the entire divine mind could not help but expand a little. Yan Chen was slightly stunned. On the other side, Scott shouted again, "Jin." Only then did Jean Grey come back to her senses and said inexplicably, "What's wrong?" Scott was full of suspicion, looking at Jean Grey with a restless face. Just now, she was exchanging glances with the guy in front of her. What happened? Is this guy so charming? He has always admired Jean Grey for a long time. Thinking of the little actions of the two, he couldn't help but feel a little naughty. What's more, this man was in the same room with the two beauties, which made this feeling even more depressed. Thinking of this, Scott also planned to keep her, and said to Yan Chen angrily, "Since you already look down on the members of the Brotherhood. Well, I won't say much. I just hope that the Brotherhood won't come knocking on your door, lest your boasting bursts." After saying that, he was ready to leave with Jean Grey. But seeing Jean Grey still not coming back to her senses and still thinking about her, Scott got even angrier and said rudely, "Let's go." After all, he couldn't detect the fluctuations of the Phoenix divine mind between the two, and thought that she just fell in love with that pretty boy with extraordinary temperament. Chin Grey breathed a sigh of relief, ignoring the slightly angry man next to her. The heat surging in her body made her feel a little upset. She also knew that she couldn't stay here any longer. At the moment when their figures gradually left, Yan Chen also looked back from the shock just now. The phoenix fluctuations coming from her body could actually be used by him. And the fluctuations that were extremely tacit and synchronized with each other made the two of them feel a sense of mutual appreciation. Feeling the hunger and thirst from the phoenix soul, Yan Chen couldn't help but feel a little strange in his heart, and a thought of trying to completely occupy this woman also emerged. Something is wrong. Yan Chen came back to his senses instantly, knowing that it was the mental link they had just established that was causing trouble, so he shook his head and went directly into the house. In the living room, Helen was a little worried, looking at Yan Chen and said, "Really don't worry about the mutant brotherhood. Am I going to trouble you too much?" After all, she was not Yan Chen who was isolated from information, and she had heard of the name of the brotherhood a long time ago. Not to mention the two members I met last night, their boss Magneto alone was even more notorious. It was rumored that even a nuclear submarine weighing tens of thousands of tons could not escape his control. So you can imagine how terrifying this Magneto is. Yan Chen listened to her words, woke up from his thoughts, and said, "Don't think too much. For me, it's really not a difficult problem." Susan patted her shoulder and said, "That's right. After last night, you haven't realized Yan Chen's magic yet." That's right. Helen couldn't help but imagine the magic he showed last night, which disappeared silently in an instant, and the pair of weird golden vertical pupils couldn't help but reflect in her heart again. Thinking back to that night, Yan Chen stood in front of her and blocked the figure of the lizard beast. Helen couldn't help but feel a little relieved. However, this feeling of completely relying on Yan Chen alone, Helen couldn't help but feel her heartbeat quickened, and the feeling of being protected made her feel a little sweet. However, I can't just become a burden. As a top student who has lived independently for a long time. Helen took a deep breath and said directly, "If possible, accept the transformation of the enhancement potion now. If Yan Chen doesn't doubt it, I think I will receive some training from you." Feeling her unwillingness to be outdone, Yan Chen also nodded and said, "Of course. A woman is so motivated. Naturally, I can't just stand still." After all, he just witnessed the more terrifying existence in this world. Although it was weak, the desolate and deep momentum was enough to be deeply imprinted in his mind. This is also the fluctuation of the phoenix's divine mind, but compared to the divine beast fox, this fluctuation is even greater, as if boundless. But thinking that he could be absorbed by himself, Yan Chen also made up his mind that sooner or later he would find Jean Grey. And now, the most important thing is to start reading the Book of Vishanti. "Okay, I got it." Helen's gentle and low voice slowly echoed in the space. Then she hung up the phone. Then she looked at Susan, who leaned over to eavesdrop, and said with a smile, "It's a call from S.H.I.E.L.D. They have found evidence of Doom's crime." As soon as the words fell, the whole atmosphere was a little solemn and quiet. Susan said a little nervously at this time, "They didn't find Yan Chen. After all, Yan Chen killed Doom completely for revenge. After all, he is a well-known figure, so he will inevitably attract the attention of many interested people." Yan Chen looked at the nervous Susan, and immediately rubbed her head with his hand, and said unhappily, "Just rest assured. Although there is no Ministry of Magic that specializes in dealing with these issues here. But he acted cleanly and neatly, and it was difficult to find the problem by himself, not to mention, even if he found it, what would it matter?" Helen also said comfortingly at the right time, "No. They just found out that Doom killed the major shareholder of Fengdu Group. And through video surveillance, they found that he has terrifying superpowers like us. Doom was the only one who was alone in the safest area of the space station when the cosmic rays came last time, so few people knew that he also had superpowers. Moreover, they have not found any trace of Doom, so they have classified him as missing and absconding for fear of crime." Helen had just finished speaking. Susan breathed a sigh of relief, smiled sweetly and said, "That's great. Missing. I'm afraid he will be missing for the rest of his life." Yan Chen thought of Doom, who had already turned to ashes, and directly made a final judgment on him. "Okay, now drink the potion in your hands." Yan Chen's voice came over. If it weren't for this phone call, the two of them would have drunk the bottle of enhancement potion completely. After listening to Yan Chen's words, Susan and Helen looked at each other, but unscrewed the bottle cap, then tilted their necks and drank the red liquid in the bottle. Gulp, gulp. The sound of swallowing in the throat kept coming. It tasted fishy and spicy at the beginning, and then turned into a long line of fire and poured directly into the throat. As soon as it entered the throat, the slightly violent liquid medicine immediately followed the blood vessels of the human body and spread the medicinal effect to the limbs and bones. Hot. The two women only needed one thought to carry it through their minds. Fine sweat immediately appeared on their smooth foreheads, and the whole white shirt was directly soaked by sweat, revealing the underwear underneath. Then a slightly foul smell spread from the body. The effect of the whole medicine is more like a meridian in marrow, so it will naturally wash away the impurities in the body thoroughly. At this time, Yan Chen also carried her in one by one, and then put them in the bathtub that had been properly placed. In this process, it is natural that all the clothes have to be taken off. So Yan Chen, it was a bit surprising. I didn't expect that Helen, who usually wears tight clothes, had a large snowball underneath. Her waist and ribs were miraculously narrowed, forming a graceful waistline. But below the slender waist, the curve suddenly widened again, showing the curves of her figure. After retracting the distracting thoughts in his mind, Yan Chen slowly stood outside the bathroom, quietly waiting for the two of them to wash. This wait took an hour. After all, the sticky black impurities made them feel extremely disgusted, so it was understandable and acceptable. When they walked out of the bathroom door, Yan Chen's eyes lit up. After the impurities in the body were removed, the skin of the whole person was like the finest porcelain, white and delicate without a trace of flaws. Under the white light, it was even surrounded by a delicate color. Obviously, this is already a success. Yan Chen slightly gathered his distracting thoughts and said in admiration. After successfully taking the enhancement potion, even the frail Susan and Helen, their personal physical fitness is enough to crush a well-trained special forces soldier. What's more, as the physical foundation rises to a higher level, their own abilities have been improved to some extent. In this case, although it may not be much of an improvement for Susan, who is more inclined to spiritual thoughts, it must be of great help to Helen, who can release and absorb in one body. Next, after he explained some things clearly, he walked into the meditation room alone. More important problems still waiting for him. Manhattan, Osborne Group headquarters. In the chairman's office, a middle-aged man sat on a thick and soft sofa, quietly looking through the floor-to-ceiling windows over 300 meters high, looking at the entire city of Manhattan below. He often watched quietly like this, because it made him feel like he was stepping on the entire city. A man who could sit in this office so calmly and have such great ambitions naturally showed his identity. Norman Osborne, the chairman of the Osborne Group. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Norman came back to his senses and said. After hearing the words, the staff outside came to the desk carefully and respectfully. Chairman, after repeated confirmation, the incident with Druck was still an accident. Norman turned around immediately, put his hands on the edge of the table, and said with a sneer, so, Druck was crazy, stepped on the accelerator to death, and crashed into the building in front without paying any attention to it. This sounds really weird, but he was the only one in the car, and maybe he was drunk. But even thinking of this, the staff did not dare to disobey his words. After all, Chairman Norman in front of him is famous for his domineering personality, and is commonly known as the tyrant. Norman looked at the guy in front of him who didn't say a word, and continued, I only know that Druck found that little Yan Chen before the incident, right? Yes, that's right. That's great. He is the biggest suspect in this matter. No need to think too much. It must have been him who did it. But there is no evidence after all. The staff wiped the sweat from his forehead and said with a little panic. Evidence. Norman stood up, showing a hideous smile and said, I only need a motive for suspicion. And what I say is the law. Do you have any objection? The words I say are the law. This statement is really rampant and lawless, and it does not take any people and order into consideration. If someone else said this, the sweaty and nervous staff member would immediately sneer, but the person who said it was Chairman Norman. He who holds the Osborne Group in his hands is not afraid of anyone at all, and he is also qualified to look down on anyone in the world. Even the so-called pride of New York, the Fangdu Group before it went bankrupt, is only 1% of the market value of the Osborne Group. Therefore, he is also qualified to despise the life and death of most people. No comment. Of course I have no objection. The staff member named Horton responded with a trembling voice. His body was even more disappointing, his legs were shaking and trembling. He didn't even dare to meet Norman's eyes. After a while, he wiped the sweat off his face and said, "Then when I go down, I will have someone arrest that Yan Chen." He couldn't help but feel heartbroken for this unlucky guy. There was no way. For the powerful Norman, no matter whether you are the murderer behind the scenes or not, a suspicious motive is enough to convict you. As for finding the wrong person, you can only blame your bad luck. This can't even win a word of apology. Norman flipped through the documents handed over on the desk, and then said, "Wait, this guy is still living with the two women of the Fantastic Four, right?" "That's right. That's true," Horton said with a little envy. "This pretty boy is really blessed. Or two people with special abilities. Wait a minute. This doesn't need to be left to you." Norman pondered for a while, but said directly. Horton immediately understood the hidden meaning. His subordinates were all mercenaries. It would be very difficult to deal with these people with special abilities. During the last capture of the giant lizard, a small team was inexplicably lost for no reason. Of course, he didn't know that the whole team was killed by Yan Chen, so he put the blame on the giant lizard. However, he didn't use his mercenaries this time. Doesn't that mean they want to capture two members of the Fantastic Four, along with Yan Chen? The risk is too great. He couldn't help but say carefully, "Chairman, isn't this too risky?" Of course, this risk is not about whether it can be succeeded, but the risk of the fishing reel after success. After all, the two women are well-known figures in society. Unexplained disappearance will inevitably attract the full attention of S.H.I.E.L.D. But even so, Norman's expression did not change, and he still insisted, "You can go down." Seeing that his words were extremely firm, Horton did not say another word, and hurriedly left the office like amnesty. Bang! The door slowly closed. At this moment, Norman's expression showed a hint of ferocity. He knew how great the risk was, but he could not afford to delay. His right hand slowly rolled up the sleeve of his left arm, revealing the underneath. Green skin. That's right. In addition to being the chairman of the famous Osborn Group, he is also a supercriminal in New York, the Green Goblin. However, becoming the Green Goblin was entirely caused by a medical accident in the past. This virus was stored in his genes, giving him unmatched physical fitness. Of course, it also changed his mind from then on. He couldn't deny that the Green Goblin's identity contributed greatly to the development of the Osborn Group to what it is today. But the abominable thing is that this virus is going to take his life completely. He doesn't have much time left in his life, and he can't forgive it. So, he struggled desperately. Therefore, Norman vigorously supported the research of the Life Gene Project, but this is simply a bottomless pit for swallowing up funds. According to a researcher, although the super serum is a drug from the Second World War, there has never been an enhanced drug in this area since then. But he still invested heavily and spent hundreds of billions of dollars. It was not easy to make Dr. Connors's gene transplantation project come to life, but he didn't expect that a monster named Dr. Lizard was born again. This made Norman completely desperate. And it made him completely crazy. At the graduation ceremony, Norman was overjoyed when he saw Yan Chen, who was able to use unknown kung fu to defeat Dr. Lizard, and that was why the following episode happened. But when he heard about the successful genetic mutation of the Fantastic Four, Norman was even more greedy and wanted to use this opportunity to thoroughly study the principle of their mutation. So, he took the risk and ordered them to be captured. Because Norman's life couldn't wait any longer. Moreover, this is a genetic disease, and his son, poor Harry, doesn't know that he has inherited this virus. If Norman just gave up, what would happen to his son? And because of the rash decisions made over the years without considering the company's stock price, those hateful shareholders would tear Harry to pieces. So, Norman must not die, and then he slowly took out his mobile phone from his suit and sent a message to a strange number. Sinister 6. Your deal is here. Green Goblin stays. In the meditation room, after Susan and Helen successfully took the enhancement potion and successfully reached a high level of physical fitness, Yan Chen was unwilling to stop there. Even though it was only a few days since his last breakthrough, he had seen the existence of a higher level of life, and his fighting spirit was burning fiercely. He wanted to climb higher. This was also the reason why he came to this world. At this time, only Yan Chen's body was left in the meditation room. Flesh and blood, his mind is no longer there, and he has been completely immersed in the meditation basin. Here, there is only Zhao Hong, wearing a magic floating cloak, silently guarding here with its wings fluttering in the wind. Of course, there is also a wisp of black shadow on the ground. In a memory scene inside the meditation basin. This is the memory scene of my past self reading the Book of Vishanti. The power of the 3 Vishanti demons can basically be regarded as the top source of magic power in Kamaji Mahal. And every supreme wizard who has been passed down to this day needs the recognition of the 3 Vishanti demons, and it is also the power of gods that every senior wizard must strive to master. Because this is the classic of white magic. So basically every wizard in Kamaji Mahal will read it carefully. Even if the text inside is extremely obscure and difficult to understand, it will not let them give up, because who doesn't dream of being recognized by Vishanti? At this time, Yan Chen has been very serious and started reading. Vishanti Trinity. As the name implies, it is composed of 3 demons, namely Hogus, Oshutu and Agamotto. Among them, Agamotto's reputation may be the most resounding. Of course, this is also due to the fact that he was the supreme sorcerer before the Ancient One. Not only was he able to confront the Dark Dimension Lord Dormammu, but when he left, he also arranged 3 temples on the earth, which became the most important magic defense barrier to protect the earth. More importantly, he is bald, and he is a bald head. So, he is very strong. Oshutu is a woman, who can also be regarded as Agamotto's mother, while the other demon, Hogus, is a fierce white tiger. In other words, just a white tiger, a woman and a bald head form a trinity. And the Book of Vishanti. It is the crystallization of their power. Although they are demons, they also belong to the category of order, so their magic is all white magic, and most of them are mainly defense, protection and treatment. Although this magic book is as thick as a brick, it contains endless white magic. Invisibility. A magic that can penetrate all kinds of obstacles. Perception. It can detect the anomalies of time and space. Illusion. It can create all kinds of false images and project them into the human brain. Countless spells were constantly displayed on the book. However, this magic book was even more full of magic power. There was never a moment when one could finish reading it. It could be said that the spells in it were enough to benefit a person for a lifetime. This undoubtedly aroused Yan Chen's strong curiosity. He put all his attention on the Book of Vishanti. In order not to affect his concentration, he did not show his arrogance as he did in the past. He directly used several clones to learn various magics. Yan Chen breathed a sigh of relief, and continued to slowly read the White Magic Codex, following his past self. But he had spent quite a while reading it. Compared to the nervous young boy in front of him, Yan Chen himself was much more relaxed. He found that the records of magic spells and related knowledge such as the use of hand gestures were not particularly complicated. Compared to the book that recorded celestial magic, it seemed a little simpler. No, this thought emerged in Yan Chen's mind. In less than half an hour, he already felt that he had mastered it. This was a bit of a slander on the White Magic Codex. No matter how evil his magic talent was, it was impossible to do it. After all, this was the supreme book that kept most mages out. So what's the problem? Yan Chen couldn't help thinking in his heart. Every magic book has a corresponding method of use. Just like if you want to use the spell related to Sagittarius, you must communicate with the energy of this star. The Book of Vishanti is no exception, and if you want to fully utilize the spells recorded in it, you must successfully communicate with the power of the 3 magic gods of Vishanti, otherwise the magic inside will be like fishing for the moon in a well, and you can't use it. Yan Chen's heart trembled, and he felt inexplicably panicked. In order to confirm his guess, he no longer hesitated. He tried to communicate with the divine power of Vishanti. With the ancient body of Hogs. The ancient name of Oshutu. Agamotto listens to me. Quote. Spells came out of his mouth one after another. Yan Chen's expression was extremely serious, and his hands kept dancing with each syllable, making complicated gestures. Then, everything was ready. Winds inexplicably arose on the flat ground, blowing the dust on the ground up continuously, and in the air, a desolate and distant momentum slowly descended. Seeing that the power of Vishanti was about to come completely. With a whooshing sound, The changes in the sky and the inexplicable winds were all unable to dissipate. Failed, Yan Chen said without changing his mood. After all, this was the first time. The second time. The sonorous and powerful words show his determination to fight hard. With the ancient body of hogs. The ancient name of Oshutu. Quote. The spell was uttered again, and as Yan Chen's hand gestures changed, the strange phenomenon in the sky reappeared. It lasted for less than 10 seconds. Whoosh! This strange phenomenon disappeared like a puff of smoke. The third time, Yan Chen's expression remained unchanged. By the light of Vishanti, the name of the defender of the earth. It failed again, and the time it took for this power to come was shortened by a few seconds. The fourth time, failed. The fifth time, failed. In the name of Vishanti. Boom. As Yan Chen finished speaking, the power of Vishanti descended upon the place again, and a terrifying storm suddenly swept through the entire library of Kamaji. Streams of warm water continued to flow into Yan Chen's body. Invisible. The spell was chanted. Then Yan Chen's whole body became transparent and blurred. Even if a missile came towards him, it could only pass through his body directly. This was the magic of the invisible spell. Whoosh! With a slight sound, the whole world suddenly disappeared again, and the storm formed in the space also disappeared. The power of Vishanti on Yan Chen's body dissipated again. And the invisible spell just now was also peeled off from his body, and his whole body became solid again. This is the seventh time. Yan Chen continued calmly. Then he did not plan to try again. Although his gestures and the magic spells he chanted were as impeccable as a textbook, the door of Vishanti was still tightly closed. This just confirmed the sentence at the beginning of the cover. Only people with pure hearts can control it. Unfortunately, he is not such a person. His mind is not pure and flawless. Half an hour ago, his mind was full of the charming and plump bodies of Helen and Susan. Similarly, Yan Chen did not have the selfless spirit of dedicating himself to the people's world. This may be the reason why he was sorted into Slytherin by the Sorting Hat when he was in Hogwarts. Ambitious, shrewd, and victory comes first. And the ambitious Slytherins can easily embark on the road of sin. So, even if his magical talent is unparalleled in ancient and modern times, the door of Vishanti seems unwilling to open its door to him because of his mentality. Yan Chen also understands it very well. So he tried 7 times and was no longer willing to try, because the result was the same. However, Yan Chen will not give up. But he will have to wait until some progress is made before he will try again. Smart. This is also the characteristic of Slytherins. Then, Yan Chen abandoned the Book of Vishanti, and chose another book, the Spell of Satoric. The Satoric Spell. This is the magic book that a wizard next to him was just reading. After Yan Chen temporarily gave up the Book of Vishanti, he couldn't help but turn to the Satoric spell, which is also on the list of banned books. Compared with the Vishanti magic that directly requires pure and flawless, kind-hearted. This spell also comes from the Satoric magic god, but there is no such requirement for the kind-hearted. Because the Satoric magic god is more inclined to chaos and disorder, a Slytherin may be more suitable for this kind of magic. And most importantly, the strength of the Satoric magic god is not inferior to the 3 Vishanti magic gods. Yan Chen breathed a sigh of relief, and then followed the wizard's page-turning progress to read in. The entire magic spell was more inclined to binding magic. This also reminded Yan Chen of the treasure room of the New York Temple, where there happened to be a crimson magic belt of Starak. Although this treasure was not as good as the magic floating cloak, its ability to imprison others was extraordinary. Putting away these distracting thoughts, Yan Chen's mind slowly immersed in the magic book again. Similarly, in order to concentrate his attention, he did not make more clones, which also showed how much he valued it. After all, the difficulty of practicing this magic spell is much more difficult than the Book of Vishanti, but Yan Chen is not worried at all. Because as long as there is no threshold for the selection of character, he is confident that his magical talent can cope with all difficulties. The obscure and cumbersome tiny handwriting, the scarlet font, the eyes feel that these fonts are constantly twisting and extending, and the scalp is numb. The nose even vaguely catches a trace of the looming smell of blood. Of course, this can also be regarded as a test of the heart. Yan Chen even had a picture of purgatory on earth in his mind. But he did not resist. Instead, he became more and more immersed in it. Because he knew that if he tried to get rid of this state of mind, he would definitely not be able to practice the magic spells in it. Wow! The sound of pages turning came slowly. Huh! Yan Chen thought he would have to wait for this guy for a long time, or that he would not be able to continue reading because of the test of his character, but he did not expect that this guy would actually hold on. Then, he could not help but look at the owner of the book, and then he found out that it was the famous Mordo. He is the eldest disciple of the Supreme Sorcerer Ancient One. He is also the most talented and intelligent one among his subordinates. It seems that his talent is indeed not weak. Yan Chen nodded secretly, and then silently continued to wait for him to turn the page. After all, there are indeed not many people who can make him wait for less time. I wonder what Baron Mordo would think when he heard that he was praised for his talent for such a reason. Soon, as time passed bit by bit, the two of them have gradually gotten into the groove and are becoming more and more immersed in the magic. At this time, Mordo's face has been covered with fine sweat, and the speed of turning the pages has been greatly reduced. Yan Chen also has a very recognized expression, but the corners of his mouth still outline a confident smile. Half an hour passed again. As the pages of the book turned more and more, the methods that needed to be comprehended became more and more complicated and cumbersome. Even the bloody smell emerging from the scarlet fonts became more and more oncoming, as if the whole person was immersed in the entire blood vat, and the Shira blood realm in his mind filled the entire mind. Mordo could no longer bear it and closed the magic book with his hand. At the same time, boom, Yan Chen's mind was in turmoil, as if a volcano was erupting in his mind. Suddenly, his mind was shaking and his vision was constantly changing. The ancient library in front of him suddenly crashed and he came to a world filled with blood. This is... Yan Chen was moved. Looking at the blood mist all around him, he knew clearly that this was Crimson Realm. And Cytoric was born in the Crimson Realm. There is no concept of space. Yan Chen looked at the red mist under his feet, there was no support at all. There is no concept of time. He also could not sense the flow of time. No mass. He could not feel the weight of his body. There is no material energy. He also couldn't communicate with any elemental power of heaven and earth. This is the weirdness of the Crimson Domain. It is a domain that completely transcends the physical universe. There is no time, no space, no material energy, no past, future and present, and it ignores all concepts of law. Yan Chen quietly comprehended and felt the touch brought by the surrounding domain. The words written in scarlet fonts that just appeared in his mind were vividly revived from the soul, constantly turning into warm currents that rushed into his limbs. This immersive perception did not last long. Boom! Another explosion sounded in his mind. Afterwards, Yan Chen's entire figure returned to the quaint library again. At this time, Mordo was still at the moment of closing the magic book, but he didn't know that Yan Chen had already stepped into the threshold. Feeling the warmth that still remained in his body, Yan Chen smiled. He knew that he had finally succeeded in entering. As expected, he was a Slytherin. Then he began to recall the spells in his mind. Although they were all powerful spells of binding and restriction, for Yan Chen, it was also a big gain. Sealing pliers, crimson chain. Then, Yan Chen returned to the meditation room and began to practice the spell seriously. In this training, a whole day has passed. Knock knock. A series of fine knocks came from the door. As the door slowly opened, a woman full of youthfulness slowly came to the door. Helen, who had just entered the door, still said in disbelief, "This curse is too terrible. It is obviously just a duplex two-story villa from the outside, but there are already 5 floors inside. But it's time for you to come out." Listening to her words, Yan Chen slowly opened his eyes. A flash of red light flashed across his eyes, and then he stood up and looked at the white sunlight outside the skylight. He knew that he had spent a lot of time. During the day, he remembered to buy clothes and supplies for Helen. After all, she had just moved in, and more importantly, most of her clothes had been burned in the explosion. "Wait for me, I'll be there soon." Yan Chen washed up and followed them out of the house. The roar of the Mercedes-Benz car drove on the road. Except for some personal trips, Yan Chen basically went out with the public in the car. Manhattan is the most economically prosperous district in New York. Of course, it has the most top-notch supporting shopping malls, and there are countless luxury brands. Yan Chen and others originally planned to have lunch after buying clothes, but Susan and Helen obviously underestimated their interest in shopping. Wash towels and other daily necessities. Daily pajamas, shirts, clothes, skirts, and even a series of clothes such as underwear and panties. In this way, but the lunchtime was dragged to dinner time. Looking at the night outside the window that was about to fall into the evening, Yan Chen also sighed softly. Although there were nothing in his hands. But because Helen's clothes were all burned in the explosion, these newly purchased clothes were huge. So even though he didn't have a bag in his hand, if it weren't for the space treasure, even if he had a dozen more arms, it would be useless. After busying around for a while, Susan clapped her hands and said with a cute smile, "By the way, we haven't eaten yet. Quote. Please. It's been several hours, and you just remembered this." Soon, the three of them went to a luxurious restaurant to have dinner. Handsome men and beautiful women, especially the combination of one man and two women, attracted a lot of people's attention. Many people even realized that they were the two female members of the Fantastic Four, and they couldn't help but cast envy in their eyes. As for the man with extraordinary temperament and appearance, he was even more jealous. Susan naturally knew it. She held Yan Chen's arm and whispered, "You don't know how powerful my man is." Yan Chen just smiled and patted her head. In order to avoid being seen, they hastily filled their stomachs in a private room. The three of them went shopping in the mall again, and after spending another 2 hours, they finished the day's shopping task. Everyone returned to the car. Prepare to go home. This is even more tiring than practicing a high-intensity spell. Yan Chen thought silently as he sat in the back seat. After a day of shopping in the mall, Susan was already exhausted. She lay on his lap like a little cat, curled up in his arms and slowly rested. His right hand gently stroked her golden hair. Soon her breathing became smooth, and her whole body relaxed, and she slowly fell asleep. In order not to wake Susan up, the car speed gradually slowed down and even the voices of Yan Chen and Helen gradually became calm. But at this time, under the illumination of the car lights, a figure suddenly appeared in the driveway. "Wrong!" Helen suddenly screamed, then swung the steering wheel violently, and the Mercedes-Benz car immediately changed direction. A loud brake sound could be heard. The front of the car even veered out of the lane. Fortunately, after driving for a while, it stopped safely. This unusual movement also woke Susan up from her sweet dream. "What's wrong?" Susan asked, opening her eyes sleepily. Yan Chen patted her on the shoulder, signaling her to be at ease. Looking at the figure standing in the driveway, Helen, who had not yet calmed down, suddenly became even more shocked. She pointed at the figure in front of her with a trembling finger and shouted, "It's him! It's him! The guy who broke into the laboratory last time!" Under the dim light of the car lights, the sturdy figure stood on the street like a pillar, his long golden hair gleaming in the light, and his bulging muscles could be vaguely seen. Suddenly, the car following behind was also driven by a female driver. She did not expect that there was an extra figure on the lane. Before she could react, she ran into it without slowing down. Bang! A violent roar was heard. Wisps of smoke suddenly floated in the air. Just when the owner of the car thought someone was killed, the blonde sturdy man in front of him actually put his hands in front of him to block the impact of his super high speed. What kind of monster is this? But the next second, the female driver couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. At least she didn't have to bear legal responsibility for this life. Bang! A violent sound suddenly came from the engine hood in front of her. This figure appeared on the hood, and then pierced through the car window with both hands. What's more terrifying is that a hideous bone claw emerged from the back of his hand and stabbed the driver inside to death. Ah! Helen couldn't help but scream. This scene reminded her of the researcher who was also stabbed to death by him in the laboratory, and she also remembered the scene of the two chasing each other in the corridor. If it weren't for her quick thinking, she would have been caught by him long ago. Now, he is coming to kill her again. At this time, a hand was pressed on Helen's beautiful shoulder, and Yan Chen's words came over, "Don't worry." Listening to his warm and approachable words, Helen's nervousness just now was also dispersed, and now it is different from the past, and her ability is no worse. "Leave it to me." Yan Chen patted Susan's hand and motioned her to rest assured. Then the whole person slowly got out of the car door. In order to take care of their safety, Arya turned into a shadow and possessed the vehicle. Watching a young man getting off the car, the saber-toothed tiger just glanced at him out of the corner of his eye and ignored him. Instead, he said in a sarcastic tone, "Young man, I'm sorry, you are not in my eyes yet. You are not my target either. And, you know, what is the fate of a hero saving a beautiful girl?" A middle-aged man came out from the back seat, holding a baseball bat in his hand, and rushed over shouting. The figure of the saber-toothed tiger flashed, easily grabbed the baton with one hand, and stabbed his body with the other hand. Humph, just like this. This is the fate of a hero saving a beautiful girl. The sharp claws of his right hand pulled away. Swish. Blood spurted out like a spring. The figure in front of him fell to the ground and never got up again. The saber-toothed tiger wiped the blood off his hands leisurely, then stood firm and slowly walked towards the young man, twisting his neck bones to make bursts of noises. "How about it, young people, still unwilling?" Seeing Yan Chen smiling, the saber-toothed tiger was puzzled, but suddenly, his pupils shrank and he looked up at the sky. At this moment, a sharp whistle made a piercing sound in the air. "Who is this?" The saber-toothed tiger tensed his expression and muscles. A fierce sound of breaking through the air came from afar. At the same time, a huge irregular black shadow suddenly broke through from the night clouds. Buzz. The two huge black wings actually made a series of swooshing sounds, and suddenly opened up at the moment of landing, completely suppressing the falling momentum and landing steadily on the electric pole. As soon as it touched, the electric pole couldn't help but burst out with a crackling sound of electricity, but even so, it couldn't hurt the black hideous claws at all. Jehi. A creepy laugh suddenly burst out from the giant black bird. Seeing this scene, the saber-toothed tiger below was tense, and his muscles couldn't help but swell and contract. His body had already maintained a fighting posture, because the momentum emitted by this strange black bird made him very uncomfortable. However, seeing the exaggerated black wings, mask and claws, he couldn't help but think of a super criminal who was wreaking havoc in New York. The saber-toothed tiger couldn't help but say puzzledly, "Vulture. Since there are still people who know my name." The vulture continued to make a defiant cry, and then a pair of pupils hidden under the black mask could not help but look down. Looking at this strange blonde muscular man, he could not help but look at him again and again, and then said bluntly, "I'm sorry, you are not in my eyes. You are not my target." Puff. After hearing this, Susan couldn't help but laugh. This sentence was just said by the saber-toothed tiger, but in less than a few seconds, it was applied to him. Listening to this clear and pleasant voice like a silver bell, the saber-toothed tiger felt extremely harsh, his face was dull, and he couldn't help but glared at each other, but the little girl in front of him was hiding behind Yan Chen's back, so he could only glare at Yan Chen not far away. But, the young man still had a smile on his face, as if he didn't care about the staring and the killing just now. After being ridiculed, the saber-toothed tiger couldn't help but vent his anger on Yan Chen. "Very good, young man. I admire your courage. I was going to spare your life, but seeing that you look like you deserve a beating, you have been sentenced to death by me." After speaking with a thick neck, the saber-toothed tiger ignored the dying man's expression, and instead looked at the vulture on the electric pole and said, "Why are you here? Are you their helper?" Although he was slapped in the face and ridiculed, the saber-toothed tiger had no way to fight back. After all, the guy in front of him could fly. No matter how strong he was, it was difficult to reach one of his feathers. Moreover, he suddenly intervened before he could take action, so the saber-toothed tiger was very suspicious. Could this guy be their helper? Jehi. After listening to the vulture, he smiled fiercely again, and then continued to say to him, "If I were their helper, you would have died long ago. How could you have the chance to jump around and talk here?" As soon as the voice fell, puff, Susan once again drew out a sweet smile, and laughed embarrassedly. "This is too hurtful." Sensing the malicious gaze of the saber-toothed tiger again, she couldn't help but continue to hide on Yan Chen's solid back and laughed secretly. Yan Chen also nodded and said in agreement, "That makes sense." Caw. The saber-toothed tiger's fists kept ringing, looking at the couple, with a fierce and cruel look. "Laugh. Laugh, you two dogs. My target is only Zhao Hailun, that woman, so you can go to hell later." As soon as the words were finished, his eyes couldn't help but look at the young man in front of him. It was still the same face with a little smile in the calm. Why is this guy so calm? Ordinary people would have been scared by him, but what was wrong with this guy? Especially the smiling eyes, as if filled with a sense of playfulness. Saber-toothed Tiger's heart was inexplicably pounding. This feeling, it was like the look of Magneto looking at him. Even worse than that. However, how could this appear in the eyes of a teenager? This must be his own illusion. Saber-tooth shook his head and suppressed these unrealistic fantasies. Although he was insulted by the Vulture just now, he also knew an important information, that he was not here to help them. It was obvious that this notorious super criminal must have targeted these three people. Thinking of this, he blushed, suppressed his anger, and said to the Vulture hanging in the air, I guess you are also targeting them, but I only need Zhao Hailun, the others are yours. He. With laughter, the Vulture said again, but why should I give you a face? The words were extremely harsh. Saber-tooth had been humiliated time and time again, and thinking of this, he roared at the Vulture, just relying on the reputation of our Brotherhood of Mutants. And do you think you can kill me? A pair of ferocious bone claws stretched out from his arms. Although he couldn't reach him, it would be difficult for him to kill him. At this time, hearing the name of the Brotherhood of Mutants, the Vulture restrained his laughter, and still said in that harsh voice, okay. These people are also the targets of our Sinister Six. However, for Magneto's sake, I'll leave it to you alone. The Sinister Six. It turned out to be this group of guys. Saber-tooth was alert again, and then he looked around and found that there was nothing except the lights in the distance. Only then did he feel relieved. Although his tone of beating the dog to look at the owner made him feel uncomfortable, he didn't want to stay here when he thought that this group of guys was the most notorious in New York. Good. Zhao Hailun is mine. The other two are yours. It's decided happily. Very good. Deal, the Vulture said after a burst of unruly laughter. However, this was a faint word that suddenly bloomed in the ears of the two people. Don't you want to ask my opinion? I don't agree. Yan Chen shrugged, looking at the two groups of forces that suddenly came to kill. He was very interested. The Vulture then lowered his head and said to Yan Chen grimly, this is not up to you. On the other side, the saber-toothed tiger, who had long been unhappy with this young man, showed a hideous smile, and asked for your opinion. Do you think this is a seminar? It turns out that this young man is just a fool. It turns out he's just a young fool. Saber-tooth thought secretly. He felt even more absurd about his illusion. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but said to Yan Chen in front of him, do you still remember what I said just now? Since you have been reserved, I won't kill you directly. Losing both arms is inevitable. After he finished speaking, his long golden hair like a lion's mane stood on end, and it was obvious that he was furious. On the other side, Yan Chen just said to himself nonchalantly, one is the Brotherhood of Mutants. The other is some evil six. Remember correctly, in case I go to the wrong person. Go to the wrong person. This guy is too arrogant. Arrogant. Then thinking about the anger he had just received, the saber-toothed tiger couldn't help but burst out with energy, and his muscles swelled again, and his pair of ferocious bone claws emitted an even colder luster. If you don't mind, I'll teach him a lesson first. Although the words were in an inquiring tone. But before the Vulture could give his opinion, the energy emanating from his entire body continued to rise, and his body collapsed into a bow shape, like a sharp arrow ready to be fired. When the energy was condensed to the extreme, bang! The ground sank for the most part, and the saber-toothed tiger's body instantly disappeared from the spot, erupting straight forward. What a fast speed! The Vulture's pupils couldn't help shrinking, and he sighed secretly. Boom! With the roar of the aileron engine, the two huge black wings couldn't help but open up, ready to help in times of crisis. After all, the Green Goblin's request is to have a living human body. Boy, don't take my prey. Before he finished speaking, the saber-toothed tiger had already rushed to the front. But at this moment, snap! With the horrifying sound of bones breaking, the saber-toothed tiger's burly body flew backwards like a broken puppet, and after a few consecutive bangs, it fell to the ground and stabilized its body. What happened? The saber-toothed tiger, which was so aggressive just now, was thrown out quickly after a confrontation. The Vulture was still wondering whether he should provide protection. As a result, this young man. No, A warning sound suddenly roared in his mind. This is his survival instinct. With the help of this instinctive reaction honed in life and death, he can turn danger into safety countless times. Therefore, the vulture did not hesitate at all. The whole body was about to fly into the sky, and the roar of the huge black feathers suddenly resounded throughout the sky. But at this time, Crimson Chain, Yan Chen's words came out softly. These magical words suddenly became a buzzing sound in the ears. Word by word, they bloomed clearly in the ears and even went directly into the mind and resounded. Boom! The vulture felt that his mind was a mess, and then his eyes suddenly turned blood red, and the outside world's vision was colorless. Clang! Waves of chain scratching sounds followed. Where are the chains in the air? The vulture thought he had further auditory hallucinations, but he didn't expect that his soaring flying speed suddenly stopped, and his body became inexplicably heavier. A thick scarlet chain was wrapped around his waist and abdomen. What was going on? Before he could think carefully about the principle. Clang! There were waves of twisting and colliding sounds of chains. The sound of breaking through the air followed, and the two huge black wings on the back were bound and entangled by these chains, and then a sizzling sound of electricity was emitted. Vulture. He is not a mutant animal like Dr. Lizard. The reason why he can fly is just relying on this pair of high-tech aircraft. Boom! The engine of the aileron once again spurted out violent airflow, trying to use it to propel forward. This is an aircraft that can reach the speed of sound almost instantly, but because of the crimson chain wrapped around the back, it can't move a long distance. Ah! Vulture cried out in surprise. He couldn't help but wonder where these chains came from. Then he turned around and saw a dark hole in the sky above the electric pole. All the chains wrapped around his body were ejected from this hole. This is simply... what a joke! Who is this guy? The vulture said in a trembling voice. Who are you? He was now secretly annoyed. If he hadn't been so greedy and reckless, wanting to swallow up most of the huge sum of money alone, he wouldn't have come alone to arrest people. But he didn't expect that he would be arrested instead of arresting people. Thump! The footsteps fell heavily. Yan Chen ignored the words of the stray dog and gradually walked to the heels of the other stray dog. Don't play dead. You still dare to call yourself a saber-toothed tiger? Judging from your current performance, you are nothing but a sick cat. Yan Chen saw through his disguise at a glance and said bluntly. The injuries caused by being knocked away by him just now would probably be serious injuries to anyone, but it would have no effect on a guy who can heal quickly and has a good physique. Such provocative words immediately made the saber-toothed tiger, who was extremely embarrassed to play the role of a corpse, very angry, and then his body suddenly jumped up, set off a burst of whistling momentum, and punched the boy in front of him. Dying struggle. This thought flashed through Yan Chen's mind, and just as he was about to take action, he heard a gust of wind in his ears. He was stunned, and then the action in his hands could not help but stop. Arrogant. The saber-toothed tiger looked at Yan Chen, who was defenseless, and burst into a violent, the sound of a fist, which condensed the whole body's energy, could not help but make an even more terrifying explosion sound. It was about to get close. A piece of red cloth suddenly floated in front of his eyes. What a joke! Do you think a piece of rag can block your fist? The saber-toothed tiger couldn't help but sneer and thought. Bang! A loud collision sound soon echoed in the sky. The fist that exerted all the strength of the whole body was actually blocked by this seemingly soft cloth. The pupils of the saber-toothed tiger contracted, and a gust of wind blew in his face. So fast, only one thought flashed through his mind. The body couldn't keep up with the nerve reaction, and then he was knocked out by Yan Chen's fist again. On the other side, the vulture saw the scene below and cried out in surprise. Then, without hesitation, he took off his main black wing flying device with a click and tried to fly away with the help of his escape ejection suit. Bang! The close-fitting escape suit device was embedded in the external aircraft, so after removing the specific bolts, the whole body of the vulture was suddenly propelled into the air by the jet flame at the back of the escape suit. But at this time, a crisp sound suddenly bloomed in the air. Xiao Hong. As Yan Chen finished speaking, the magic floating cloak behind him suddenly soared into the sky. Zhong. Yan Chen spoke again in a light voice. Then the entire magic floating cloak suspended in the air suddenly continued to extend and spread. The cloth, which was originally the size of the cloak, expanded rapidly by tens or hundreds of times. In the blink of an eye, The entire night scene dotted with starlight suddenly fell into darkness under the cover of the magic floating cloak. Feeling the sudden dim starlight, the vulture couldn't help but look back. Ah! A cry of surprise burst out from his mouth again. The crimson chain that had just emerged from the void was enough to shock him, but he did not expect that the piece of cloth behind him would continue to extend and expand, and soon it would cover the sky and the sun. Soon, the black shadow under the cloak completely covered him, who was fleeing in a panic. Collect! Yan Chen's voice came again. After covering the vulture, the magic floating cloak that was constantly expanding and spreading suddenly began to shrink rapidly under the voice. In less than a few seconds, it perfectly restored to its previous appearance. The only difference was that the inside. But it covered a figure that was still struggling. Ah! Let me go! The voice was still coming from inside. With a bang, the whole cloak fell to the ground, and then the figure wrapped inside was pushed out with a loud bang. The vulture, who thought he had escaped, still wanted to run away. Well, but in front of him was a face with a smile on it, and it was this guy who made him so embarrassed that the vulture could not help but let out a very exaggerated scream. The very proud and iconic laughter just now was no longer there. Looking at the guy who cast the weird magic in front of him, the vulture could not attack or run away. Attack! Without that set of flying machine combat suit, he himself was just a waste, and although his hands and feet were still covered with a layer of hideous steel claws. But thinking of this guy, he easily defeated the saber-toothed tiger with a reputation for cruelty. He instantly gave up this plan. Escape. After seeing the magic floating cloak that covered the sky just now, he would not dare to run outside even if he had the courage. Can't attack, can't run. So, the vulture had an idea and finally made up his mind. With the most resolute and ruthless look, he quickly walked forward a few steps, facing Yan Chen, who was so close, his expression did not waver at all. Then, he fell to his knees on the ground, shouting, "Sir! Spare my life!" Quote. Yan Chen blushed. Just now, he had a resolute look on his face, and he thought he was going to do something that would destroy both himself and the enemy. But he had never expected this guy to be so stubborn. Listening to his duck-like voice, Yan Chen couldn't help but frown slightly, and then watched him stretch out his hand and hug his thigh pitifully. Without saying a word, Yan Chen couldn't help but step back half a step, barely avoiding his palm. This half step, since Yan Chen came to the world, he could not think of a way to make him retreat half a step in the battle. However, the vulture in front of him actually did such a great feat. However, in this way, it was simply astonishing. "Okay, stop it," Yan Chen said softly. But this plain voice was undoubtedly like a thunder in the ears of vulture. He said tremblingly, I'm really wrong. Please, give me a chance." The words were so tearful that they made people cry. If they hadn't seen his arrogant and unruly side before, maybe everyone would have been deceived by this. Susan folded her arms, looked at him indifferently, and said, "Didn't you want to kidnap us just now?" Hearing someone respond, Vulture was like a drowning man, grabbing the last straw, crying and shouting, "Sister-in-law! I'm turning back, aren't I? If I knew that Mr. Yan Chen was a great wizard, I would not offend him even if I had 100 guts." These words revealed his bullying and cowardly character. Susan had intended to scold him, but when she heard the word, sister-in-law, she lost her composure. Her face, which was cold just now, suddenly turned slightly red. Obviously, this guy is quite good at observing people's expressions. The saber-toothed tiger on the other side gradually woke up, but also heard the vulture's servile words. Thinking that he was insulted and scolded by such a lackey, a mouthful of blood came out of his throat. Shameless. It's so shameless. The saber-toothed tiger gradually stood up. The wound from the previous punch was recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the sound of crackling bones burst out from its body. "I miss you, a New York super criminal." Before he finished speaking, a horrible roar suddenly exploded in front of the saber-toothed tiger. A wide wound suddenly appeared on its solid and sturdy body. The body that had just stood firm suddenly became shaky and fell to the ground. This unusual movement, even Yan Chen was slightly stunned. Helen, Susan's pretty face was also full of worry. Helen, wearing a white dress, stood not far away. The night breeze blew slowly, making the hem of her dress rustle. She raised her arm slightly, and wisps of white smoke came out of her palm. Second shot. This is for the dead SHIELD security personnel. Helen's cold words burst out again. Then, a more dazzling energy cannon burst out from the palm of her hand, and with a bang, it completely tore the hideous wound on the saber-toothed tiger again. Cough cough. The saber-toothed tiger couldn't help but spit out more blood, and the healing speed of the wounds on its body was much slower. Seeing his miserable appearance, Helen couldn't help but think of the corpses she saw in the laboratory last time. Those corpses were either protecting her or researchers who were studying there. This was unforgivable. The third shot, the fourth shot, burst out from her palms one after another. Bang! Under such devastation, the saber-toothed tiger's body was already in tatters, and even the signs of healing were very weak, reflecting the side of the wounds on his body. Just when Helen gritted her teeth and prepared to end his life with the last shot, a figure suddenly appeared and grabbed her arm directly. "Let me do this dirty work." Then, a magic wand in his palm spurted out a faint light. Avada Kedavra. Bang! As Yan Chen's faint voice came, the black magic wand in his hand suddenly spewed out a faint light, and with a swoosh, it shot directly towards the saber-toothed tiger's forehead. The saber-toothed tiger, whose body was in tatters, had no time to react and could only watch the green light shoot into his brain. Boom! The brain felt completely bombarded. Ah! The saber-toothed tiger couldn't help but let out a heart-wrenching cry. Its bright eyes dimmed and its struggling body suddenly lost its vitality and became motionless. Under the Avada Kedavra that directly targeted the souls of others, even the saber-toothed tiger, which was famous for its self-healing ability, was not immune. A gust of wind blew, and the broken body suddenly caught fire. It melted away at a speed visible to the naked eye. Huh! Helen looked at this scene and sighed, then turned to Yan Chen with a bright and moving smile. "Okay, are you okay?" Yan Chen patted her shoulders in relief. He didn't expect Helen to be able to overcome her fear, but why should she be involved in these dirty jobs of killing people? Then, he walked towards the vulture lying on the ground. Ta ta ta. The footsteps seemed to step directly on the vulture's heart. After seeing him kill the saber-toothed tiger easily, his heart suddenly beat non-stop. Could it be his turn? "Boss, I am innocent. I am only doing this for money. I want to report it. I want to report the other members of the Sinister Six, and that green devil is the culprit." During this short journey, Vulture directly pulled out his heart and shouted, "The Sinister Six, Green Devil." Yan Chen approached, and an oppressive figure suddenly loomed over his head. That's right, Vulture didn't care to betray his accomplice and continued, "They are the ones who take money to do the work. Of course, the most important thing is that Green Goblin guy, everything is controlled by him." At the moment of his life, the very stubborn Vulture immediately told all the reasons. Although they are members of the Sinister Six, they are all extremely vicious characters and no one is willing to submit to anyone. So although they seem to be an organization, there are a lot of intrigues among them. Vulture is still able to betray and defect. Yan Chen listened to all this and said with great interest, "Green Goblin. He is the one who controls it. Then who is he?" After that, he wiped the black magic wand in his palm with a white tissue. Looking at this black magic wand that is actually a weapon, Vulture swallowed his saliva, and fine sweat broke out on his forehead. "Green Goblin. We don't know who he is either. After all, many people in our line of work hide their identities." "Really? Then what use do I have for you?" He smiled, then slowly pointed the wand in his hand at him. The Vulture gave up immediately, then said in a daze, I don't know who that guy is, but I know that this Green Goblin is very rich. Many of the team's high-tech equipment and even the funds for operations were provided by the Green Goblin, so it's no wonder that Vulture is very sure that he is rich." Very good. These words suddenly sounded like heavenly voices, making Vulture feel as if he had been pardoned. However, a white light erupted from the wand in front of him. The Vulture's expression could not help but stiffen, and his pupils shrank violently. At the same time, Yan Chen's faint words came, "Soul reading." As the spell hit, the memory fragments in the Vulture's mind suddenly appeared in his pupils like movie scenes. With the support of the Phoenix Soul, Yan Chen quickly read his general memory. However, what he didn't expect was that the person in front of him was a super genius in the field of electronics and mechanical engineering, but this doctor went further and further because of the false accusation of treason, and eventually became a super criminal. However, Yan Chen was not very interested in these. It only took some time to roughly understand some of the truth of the matter, which was indeed as he said. Then, Yan Chen stopped looking up his memory, and then gently uttered again, sealing pliers. A show-off magic spark actually splashed in the air. A green thing similar to a mouthpiece suddenly shot into the vulture's mouth, and then the mouthpiece seemed to have no substance and perfectly integrated into his body. Sealing pliers. This spell can prevent the cursed person from telling anyone what he saw. And what he saw was naturally all things related to Yan Chen. Then, another magic mark silently merged into the vulture's body. After doing this, Yan Chen looked at him and said, "Okay. You can go back." Ah, the vulture touched his mouth, then shook his slightly dizzy head. He felt an inexplicable chill on his spine, and felt as if all his secrets had been discovered by him. Although he didn't know what the magic that had just merged into his body was, after hearing Yan Chen's words, he felt as if he had been pardoned and kept begging for thanks. "Boss, I was really wrong. From now on, as long as you say a word, I promise to hit wherever you point." Before he finished speaking, Yan Chen's words drifted out faintly. "Very good. I'll find you sometime. Remember to help me lead out the Green Goblin behind the scenes." Then, Yan Chen patted his shoulder as if to encourage him. Vulture's pale face was immediately covered with cold sweat, and he couldn't help swallowing his saliva. Did he really want to do it himself? Isn't this pushing himself into the fire pit? What, you don't want to? Yan Chen's words turned cold. Vulture suddenly became nervous and said quickly, "How is it possible? I will remember what the boss said." Thinking of the death of the saber-toothed tiger just now, he immediately showed a look of attentiveness. "Wait for my notice." Yan Chen just looked at him meaningfully, then turned and walked away, waving his hands in the air. In an instant, the entire surrounding space suddenly appeared with uneven mirrors, stacked layer by layer, filling the entire space, dazzling people. Mirror space. Scatter. Bang. The surrounding mirrors suddenly clanged and shattered. As a standard spell for Kamaji Mahal mages, Yan Chen would naturally not fall. As early as when they were talking nonsense, in order to avoid being seen, he had already set up a mirror space silently. The vulture was still kneeling on the ground, thinking of the dreamy scene just now. What a terrifying method it was. Suddenly thinking that he still had something to find him. A chill spread through the body. "If I had known, I would not have come," the vulture wailed. The magic floating cloak extended infinitely and soared in the sky, enough to cover the sky and the sun. These magical scenes have never been seen by the world due to the cover of the mirror space. But it was like a deep brand, deeply engraved in the mind of the vulture. Although he was full of regret that he should not have come here for the sake of profit, everything was done. Looking at the saber-toothed tiger that only left a pile of black charcoal on the ground, the vulture sighed, secretly glad that he had finally saved his life. However, after surviving the disaster, a chill emerged in his heart. He knew that he had been cast under a lot of spells, and who knew what would happen to him in the future. Thinking of this, the feeling of relief disappeared. At the other end, Yan Chen and his friends had already taken a car back to the door of the duplex apartment. It was late at night. After a day of shopping in the mall, Susan was very sleepy. After taking a bath, she fell asleep in a hurry without even saying a few words. Yan Chen took her back to the room. Helen also felt a little sleepy, but some thoughts were bothering her, so after returning to the room, she ran to the balcony not long after and enjoyed the night breeze alone. The thin nightgown on her body was so close to her body in the night breeze that her curvy and voluptuous figure was revealed. Helen sighed. Something that happened tonight kept her awake. The pleasure of revenge. Of course, there was, but it was only short-lived, and afterwards it was extremely vain. I thought I could kill that monster myself, but I didn't expect Yan Chen to control me again and make a choice for my fate again. Who is he to me? Thinking that Yan Chen was still sleeping with his beautiful woman in his arms, my complicated mood became complicated again. But at this time, wow, the glass door on the balcony slowly opened, and Yan Chen walked in. "You didn't sleep." Helen was a little surprised, and said with an inexplicable panic. Yan Chen smiled slightly, looking at the red wine in her slender and smooth hands, and couldn't help but said, "Not yet, but I can see that you can't sleep either." Helen's expression was a bit complicated, but she slightly opened her lips and took a sip of the red wine in her hand. The fiery red wine made her lips look even more rosy. Yan Chen's eyes couldn't help but look at her, and then looked at her delicate face. He also clearly saw that the fair and delicate skin on her cheeks was dyed red under the effect of alcohol. Even the jade neck and collarbone were inexplicably flying. But a small sip has made her face so rosy. It seems that Helen must be drunk. Seeing that she was not satisfied with just one sip and wanted to drink the whole glass of wine, Yan Chen couldn't help but hold her hand. Helen couldn't help but want to break free, but the strength from the arm did not move at all. Seeing this extraordinary young man in front of her, especially his caring behavior, she inexplicably felt a little happy in her heart, but then her mood became more complicated. Perhaps it was because of the influence of the alcohol. Helen said a little angrily, "This is the second time you grabbed my hand tonight and stopped me. Why, since the graduation dinner, why have you been interfering in my life again and again? Not to mention that you saved me from that lizard, but why did you give me that bottle of soothing potion? Let me know your mysterious side. Why did you take me in? Why did you give me the enhancement potion? Why did you stop me from killing me tonight? Even now, you are stopping me from drinking. Why?" Helen's face was red, and she said several whys in a row while breathing. Finally, she slowly muttered, "You are not mine. Why are you so nice to me?" Ever since the heroic rescue at the graduation dinner, Helen has had some affection for Yan Chen, but the soothing potion that followed made her even more curious. The subsequent acquaintance revealed that Yan Chen exuded a mysterious aura that made her a little fascinated. By accident, the two people's almost parallel lives became more and more intertwined, and this discovery made her a little flustered. So under the influence of a little alcohol, this scene happened tonight. After Yan Chen finished listening to the words, his expression changed a little, but this look of surprise eventually turned into a firm look. Then he kept moving closer to Helen, so that their bodies were very close, and then he held her beautiful, rosy face in his hands and said, "Okay. Now remember the next words for me. From this moment on, you are my woman. If any man touches you, I will not let him go." This is said in the name of Yan Chen, and also in the identity of a great wizard. Listening to Yan Chen's words, which were undoubtedly a declaration of love, Helen couldn't help blushing. After she finished speaking from the bottom of her heart, she had actually come to her senses a long time ago, and she couldn't help but regret it. At this moment, listening to these words, her heart was filled with sweetness. But then some taboos that violated the relationship between men and women woke Helen up from the sweetness, and she hurriedly said, "Just now. Just some drunken talk. Don't put it in, heart." After saying this, Helen's slender body gradually left the balcony. Before leaving, Yan Chen's faint words came, "But what I said was not drunken talk." After hearing this, Helen staggered, then stabilized her body, and returned to the door in a panic without saying a word. What an interesting woman, Yan Chen thought to himself, and then he slowly returned to his bedroom. No words all night. The whole night passed quietly and silently. Helen in the other bedroom did not sleep all night. When the sun was high in the sky, she was called by Susan. "Helen, it's rare to see you sleep so late," Susan said with a cute smile. Helen looked at Yan Chen in the living room with sleepy eyes, and a strange color flashed in her eyes. Then she said as if nothing had happened, "Nothing. I worked all night last night." But at this time, dong dong, the sound of knocking on the door interrupted the conversation of the two. Someone came to visit again. Could it be because of what happened last night? Susan said with a little doubt. After all, 2 innocent people died last night. Yan Chen's phoenix divine sense swept over, and then he realized who the person was. It was her, Jean Grey. Chapter 71. A fiery red long skirt revealed her plump and tight figure, and the equally gorgeous red waist-length hair made the woman's gorgeous and charming side even more vivid. And such a red-haired beauty. It was undoubtedly the Phoenix girl Qin Jie Lei. Yan Chen's eyes lit up when he saw her. When he was immersed in a bunch of beautiful women, the woman who could make him look at her differently was naturally very charming. Not only that, compared to the first meeting, Qin Jielei's dignified side of teaching and educating people was completely gone, and the whole person was full of another side of charm and beauty. It is not uncommon to see a woman who can integrate these two extreme temperaments of dignity and beauty into one. Shadow Girl Arya is one. Qin Jielei in front of him is also one. But Yan Chen's expression suddenly had a hint of strangeness. Then, looking at the woman in front of him, he inexplicably smiled. This was the second time his emotions fluctuated. Quite interesting, Yan Chen sighed in his heart. Then, he stood in front of the door, looked at the woman leisurely and said, "Isn't this Jean Grey from X-Men? Where is the man with glasses last time? Why isn't he with you?" After hearing these words, the fiery woman smiled and said, "Cyclops has something to do, so I'm the only one here this time." Something. Yan Chen seemed unwilling to let go of this topic and continued to ask. She pondered for a while, then said, "Yes. According to rumors, some members of the Brotherhood have already rushed to Canada, so Cyclops has gone with them. Of course, this is also the reason why I came again. I heard that the saber-toothed tiger came to you last night." Yan Chen did not answer immediately, but looked straight into her eyes, showing an unfathomable smile, and said, "That's right. You are quite well informed." Qin Grey frowned, but the face opposite was full of a playful look, which made her feel inexplicably flustered. Could it be? Impossible. She immediately dismissed the idea in her mind, and after calming down for a while, she said, "I'm sure you understand how powerful the saber-toothed tiger is. I was relieved to hear that you were all safe, but this threat had to be eliminated, so do you know where the saber-toothed tiger is?" "Saber-toothed tiger? Ask about his whereabouts." Yan Chen nodded with interest, and said in agreement, "This guy's self-healing is worthy of praise." Listening to his words, Qin Grey secretly breathed a sigh of relief, and then heard Yan Chen's next words. "Why don't you come in and talk?" "Okay." She nodded, and then naturally opened the door. Bang! The door made a subtle sound when it closed the door frame. However, Qin Jielei looked at Yan Chen standing beside her, but couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Who closed the door? Then she looked back at the door behind her, and there was no one. Could it be that this door, did it close automatically? This doubt has not been completely dispelled. Standing at the entrance, she couldn't help but see the two women in the living room not far away. They were looking at her with a little curiosity, and even a bit of hostility. Is this discrimination against beautiful women? Before she could slowly savor the weird atmosphere, a faint voice came over. "This door is cast with a Muggle-repelling charm, so no one can come in without my permission." Ah, curse. Qin Grey was surprised by this strange argument. And what is this curse? What is he talking about? At this time, Yan Chen had not yet turned around, and slowly explained, "That's right. It's a curse. Sabretooth died under a curse called Avada Kedavra. Although he has an extraordinary self-healing ability, it is not very useful in the face of a spell that directly targets the soul." As soon as the words fell, Jean Grey's face was inexplicably stiff. Looking at the back of the young man, she couldn't help but feel a chill rising in her spine. She knew that Sabretooth had not returned all night and was missing. Could it be that he was killed by him as he said? This must be a joke. She forced a smile and said, "Are you kidding? And if magic is really as magical as you said, then it's also your secret. Why did you tell me?" "Yes, so I didn't plan to let you go back." Buzz. There was a gust of wind at the entrance of the room, slowly echoing in the slightly enclosed space. The woman was still slightly stunned when she heard the words just now. But the next second, as the breath in Yan Chen's body spread, boom, Qin Jielei only felt a burst of explosion in her mind, as if she was stared at by an ancient beast. Was she discovered? Looking at the young man in front of her who still had his back to her, she ran to the door without hesitation. The red skirt made a rustling sound, and the figure was like lightning, trying to break through the door directly. But at this time, the solid ground below was rolling like a blanket. Although she kept running forward, it was like she was on a treadmill, and she was basically marking time. What's going on? Changes in the spatial structure. Looking at the vermilion door in front of her, she felt that it was close at hand and far away from the end of the world. It was a distance that was clearly within reach, but under the operation of the ground space, it was impossible to reach it. "Ah, who are you?" she screamed, then gritted her teeth, gave up the road ahead, slowly turned around, ready to fight to the death. But at this time, Yan Chen's voice slowly came. Who I am the saber-toothed tiger. Ah, she turned around and saw Yan Chen, who had also turned around. Maybe it was a saber-toothed tiger. No, impossible, you liar. Listening to her wailing, Yan Chen couldn't help but smile, and then his appearance kept changing, returning to his original appearance. Yan Chen is not only an animagus who can transform into various animals, but also a metamorphomagus who can change his appearance at will. Of course, the woman in front of him is not Jean Grey at all. Although she pretends to be very lifelike and there is nothing wrong with her, other people will definitely be easily fooled by her. But the most regrettable thing is that she can't transform into the power of the phoenix. Therefore, Yan Chen, who can sense the fluctuations of the phoenix, saw through this disguised guy at a glance. Tell me, who are you? Speak up, who are you? Yan Chen said indifferently. But Qin Jie lay on the other side. Or maybe Mystique didn't believe it at all. She gritted her teeth and flew towards him like lightning, leaving a trail of afterimages behind. So that's it. You can only change your appearance, but you can't copy other people's abilities at all. Yan Chen directly pointed out the clue, otherwise she would not have chosen to attack at close range. Well, stupid behavior. Yan Chen was too lazy to even resist with flesh and blood, and just said softly, hanging upside down. An invisible wave spread out. Then, a gust of wind blew up inexplicably from the flat ground. Mystique only felt that her lower body and feet were suddenly grabbed, and then her body suddenly lost balance, her vision spun around, and then she was hanging upside down in the void. Ah! Mystique screamed and struggled, but her feet did not move at all, as if they were nailed in the air. After the space under the floor changed and her body was hanging upside down, Mystique suddenly understood what he said just now. There was no lie in it. There are wizards in this world. Before she could finish her doubts, a shout filled with anger suddenly burst into her ears. Why don't you restore your true form? How could Mystique be someone who is willing to be humiliated? As a mutant with an extreme personality, she is strong and has suffered so much discrimination and abuse. How could she succumb to the words of a guy? Humph, it's just a joke. The voice was not finished yet. Mystique suddenly felt her breath inexplicably choked, and she could not utter a word, and her face turned pale. Under the pressure of Yan Chen's dragon power, she trembled as if she was facing a natural enemy. This difference in life level directly made her unable to utter a word for a long time. Faced with this kind of soul tremor, her body could not help but keep changing and squirming instinctively. Soon, a body with dark blue skin and dense scales all over the body was exposed. At this time, Helen in the living room said directly, "This is Mystique. She was also a member of the team that attacked the laboratory last time. I didn't expect that she was not dead. Of course, Mystique's physical fitness is much better than that of ordinary people. If it weren't for the saber-toothed tiger that directly protected her body when she was in danger, she would have been seriously injured in the explosion. When enemies meet, they are particularly jealous. At this time, Helen was eager to try. After all, this woman directly killed others in order to disguise herself as a graduate student. Yan Chen looked at this naked demon who matched his aesthetic taste. So he didn't say anything good, and said directly, "Speak. What is your brotherhood's idea of going to Helen for the third time?" "I don't know." The upside-down Mystique refused directly. Yan Chen had expected this, and then a black magic wand appeared in his sleeves, and a white light spurted out from the end of the wand. Soul reading. Bang! After the spell hit, fragments of past memories suddenly appeared in Yan Chen's pupils like frames of movie scenes. He was not interested in her history of fighting for mutants, but to Yan Chen's disappointment, this woman had no idea about the inside story. As the invisible hand searching in his mind gradually left, Mystique's dull pupils regained vitality, and she said with a trembling voice, "You actually know. Reading other people's memories." The feeling of being spied on by someone maliciously just now was definitely not wrong. It was not much different from when Professor Charles activated his ability. This guy, what else could it be? However, she had expected it and said, "Don't waste your time. We, the subordinates, will not know at all. We are here to guard against you psychics." After all, in front of Professor Charles's defenseless telepathy, no one's secrets can be spared. Really, Yan Chen was not too disappointed, and then said, in that case, we should at least pay some attention to courtesy and reciprocity. Can't we just visit Magneto some other day? What? Challenge Magneto. Mystique thought she had misheard the words, and then she sneered and whispered, with you. Just forget it. Have you asked the armies of the countries that have besieged Magneto countless times over the past few decades? Have you asked the X-Men who have been trying to stop Magneto's development? He alone is enough to resist the national army that acts as the world's police, and he alone is enough to counter the superpower group X-Men. Do you think you can fight against the army and the X-Men? After a lot of words, Mystique looked at the man in front of her with joy. She wanted to detect a change in his expression. But she was wrong. The guy in front of him didn't show any fear at all, instead his face was in deep thought. After a long time, Yan Chen nodded and said, this is a good question. But why should I find the National Army and the X-Men to prove myself? Can't I just twist off Magneto's head? Twist off Magneto's head. When Mystique heard this, she laughed out loud, haha, just you. Who do you think you are? But halfway through her words, looking at the pair of pupils in front of her that were also filled with smiles, Mystique felt a little inexplicably afraid, and then she thought of his series of actions just now. Changing the space under his feet. The ability to change his appearance. The spell to hang himself upside down. The terrifying invisible pressure. The ability to read his own memory. All of this made her inexplicably scared. Even for mutants, most of them have a single ability. Mutants with 2 abilities are rare, and those with multiple abilities can be counted on fingers. But this guy in front of him had just displayed several abilities such as changing disguise, reading memory, and changing space. Mystique couldn't help but swallow her saliva. She just refuted him directly based on her first reaction, but when she thought of the ability she had just displayed, she couldn't help but. She began to worry about Magneto. Could this guy really have twisted his head? Before she could continue to think deeply, Yan Chen smiled and waved her hand casually, and invisible magic waves spread out. The solid ground at the entrance suddenly sank like an hourglass, and then her body fell directly into the underground floor, where there was a special vacant cell waiting for her. Then, a series of crimson chains emerged from the void and locked her tightly in the cell. Yan Chen clapped his hands. There happened to be an empty door below, so he suddenly had an idea to use it as a prison cell. Besides, the underground floor is where all his monsters are stored, including the famously ferocious Thunderbird, Winged Demon and other fierce beasts, so it is extremely safe. Helen frowned and said, the Brotherhood is determined to find me again and again. They must be greedy for my abilities. Although they don't understand the principle, what they are planning must be big. Thinking of the repeated terrorist attacks launched by the Brotherhood of Mutants on the world, Helen couldn't help but worry, and she was also more worried about Yan Chen in front of her. After Magneto learned that his men had failed, would he personally take action? Thinking of this, Helen's pair of eyes could not help but reveal worry. Although she had seen Yan Chen's spell, Magneto's reputation was too great after all. Just as Mystique said, this first-class brutal guy has the ability to manipulate magnetic fields. All conventional weapons are just toys in his hands. Therefore, it is not just talk that the entire country's army cannot deal with him. Even the notorious super-criminal Vulture last night, although he constantly ridiculed and mocked Sabretooth, he was still afraid of Magneto's reputation and chose to make certain concessions. Hai Lun sighed, thinking of what he said last night. He couldn't help but feel regretful, thinking only why Yan Chen was so good to him. He never thought that he had also caused a lot of trouble to Yan Chen. The crisis that came at an unknown time made her mind panic, and her heart trembled at the same time, because she had secretly made a decision for a lifelong commitment. Susan on the other side was not as flustered as Helen. She had seen more changes in spells from Yan Chen, and she was obviously not worried about Magneto. After all, she knew that her man could transform into a dragon. With her IQ that was constantly declining due to love, I'm afraid no one can withstand a breath of fire from a dragon. If there is, then spray one more breath. At this time, Susan looked at Yan Chen with suspicion. Why did you lock that woman in the basement? Could it be? Yan Chen ruffled her golden hair and interrupted her, saying, come on, she really doesn't meet my aesthetic standards. Isn't this the point? The point is that she can transform into anyone's appearance. Susan said very seriously. But Yan Chen was confused. What was this little girl talking about? Susan's face gradually turned red, and she said in a voice as soft as a mosquito, "Don't you sometimes ask me to wear this and that?" Yan Chen suddenly realized that it was a role-playing game between the boudoirs, but she was speechless. Couldn't this little girl speak more quietly? Helen on the side stared at Yan Chen in amazement, muttering, "I didn't expect you to have such a hobby." Then, thinking of her decision just now, her face flushed and she hurried into the room. Susan also exposed her shortcomings. After sticking out her tongue, she started to move in the room. Yan Chen stretched his body and saw Shi Rishang, so he prepared to go to the meditation room to continue practicing the spell. Open double angle bracket, the curse of Saitoric. I have completely broken through the threshold and have successfully communicated to the Crimson Realm. It can be said that the spells inside are almost mastered by myself, and it is just a matter of time. This magic book is worthy of the name of binding and restriction. Crimson chains. Chains suddenly emerged from the void and bound people unexpectedly. This magic is similar to my own petrification spell, but in addition to its power, it is better than more concealed, and under the activation of more magic power, it can achieve a terrifying range effect. Therefore, the biggest gain is this spell. As for the sealing forceps spell, it makes people unable to reveal any information about themselves. From the perspective of effect alone, it is not even as good as many spells in Yan Chen's hands, such as the Soul Reaper curse that makes people obey, the Oblivion curse that deletes other people's memories, and the Memory Charm that tampered with memories. However, this spell can make people maintain their personal will, but not reveal a single bit of information about themselves. It seems a bit tasteless. Perhaps the effect is more about knowing what you have done but not being able to tell others about it. Yan Chen shook his head and put these distracting thoughts back in his mind. Then, he came to the underground floor, holding the carefully prepared feed in his hand, and kept feeding these spoiled monsters. This is also his delicate work 2 or 3 times a day. Speaking of it, except for a few specific monsters, most magical animals have never been to the outside world. Of course, maybe their interest is not particularly strong. For example, the ball escape bird, although it is called a bird, can't fly at all, and the Muggles call them dodos, but they don't know that they have a terrifying teleportation ability, and they think they have made this bird extinct. Of course, the ball escape bird is also very afraid of humans in the outside world, so they are unwilling to go out even if they are beaten to death. After all, this is a space specially opened up by the Traceless Extension spell, and it is transformed into the most suitable environment for them. After feeding the last curled winged demon hanging high on the horizontal bar, Yan Chen walked out alone, but he made up his mind in his heart to find time to take some monsters out for a ride. Back to the living room. After a hasty meal, Yan Chen returned to the meditation room and continued his journey of cultivation. In the suburbs of New York. In an attic on a hill. In the sky, an irregular black shadow was quickly projected and shuttled in from the attic window. Buzz. A flapping sound of wings could not help but be heard. Then the vulture's fall was perfectly and effectively controlled, and it landed steadily on the ground. This is his daily hut, so in order to avoid being seen, it was not only built on a hill outside the suburbs, but also built relatively tall to facilitate his landing. But at this time, some unexpected people came to the hidden house. Looking at the people hidden in the dim house, the vulture sneered and said, "Come out. I can see you." Click. There was a commotion in the shadows. Then a rough voice said unceremoniously, "I heard that you want to swallow up the goods alone. This violates our agreement." Vulture was slightly stunned, but he already knew who these visitors were. The Evil Six. They are here to hold us accountable. Thinking that it was the arrival of other members, each of whom was weaker than him, Vulture couldn't help but tense up, and the giant mechanical wings that had been folded slowly expanded. Then he said, "I didn't swallow the goods alone last night, because that." Vulture wanted to tell Yan Chen how horrible he was, but a magical force blocked his throat, making him unable to utter a single word. This method was simply unbelievable. Just as he was stunned, another inappropriate voice said directly, "You are stuttering. Haven't figured out how to make up words yet? No need to say more, just do it." This last word of action was undoubtedly like a thunderbolt bursting in his ears. Ah! The vulture screamed sharply, and then it spread its wings completely, trying to escape from the skylight. But at this moment, spider webs suddenly shot out from both sides of the void, directly adhering to the pair of giant scaly wings. The flying speed could not help but stagnate, and then it fell straight down like a kite with a broken string. Bang! A loud noise came from the ground. The vulture was knocked to the ground by the sudden trap. You! A muffled cry came from the vulture's mouth, and then a pair of sinister pupils stared at the shadows. Ta ta ta! With a series of fine footsteps, a tall and strong figure walked out from the darkness in the attic. Hunter Craven. Vulture gritted his teeth and said viciously. Who else but him could set up such a trap so cleverly? Unfortunately, I had already planned this step. Where did you hide those guys? Tell me. Craven, wearing a fur coat, came to the vulture and said directly. At this time, a series of tiny sounds continued to come from the shadows of the attic. As the footsteps came, several figures walked out of the dark shadows. The hideous look and the smug smile on their faces made the vulture hate them in his heart. Are you just going to watch him do it? This is all our intention. Dr. Octopus smiled, and the four mechanical tentacles on his back kept swaying in the void, bearing their fangs and claws, which was extremely terrifying. As the nominal plan of the Sinister Six, Dr. Octopus's words are undoubtedly the most authoritative. After hearing this, Vulture's heart skipped a beat, but he did not gain any benefit from the action he took last night, and was frightened by Yan Chen. But now he explains. After being hit by the magic of the ceiling pliers, the whole person could not wash himself clean even if he jumped into the Yellow River. Vulture is also a cruel person. Seeing that he was inexplicably blamed, he said indignantly, anyway, I didn't take them down. Believe it or not. And do you think these webs can entangle me? Just as the words fell. Swoosh! A sharp sound of breaking through the air was heard. The web wrapped around the giant wings suddenly broke under the sharp claws. The vulture's wings, even its feet and claws, have the tearing power to destroy tree trunks, so these extremely thin and elastic webs really can't trap him. Hunter Craven was not annoyed at all. He folded his arms and said confidently, I didn't think about how long I could trap you. But we are a team. As long as I can trap you for a few seconds, it will be enough. The words were not finished yet. Roar! A violent roar of an animal came from far away. The vulture wailed in his heart. Before he could take off completely, a huge black shadow flew over from a distance. With a loud bang, it stepped heavily on his body. Puff! The huge force coming from his waist and abdomen made the vulture spit out a mouthful of blood. Then, his whole body suddenly fell from the air again because of the huge force above his body. Boom! The whole building shook suddenly, and the entire foundation even sank half an inch because of this huge force. The vulture, who was stuck in a pit on the ground, couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood again. Roar! Another loud roar came from the body. Feeling the fishy smell coming towards him, the vulture endured the stench and could not help but curse fiercely, Venom. The monster with a black face and a mouthful of hideous teeth was none other than the alien life form Venom. He could not help but move his bloody mouth closer, as if he wanted to bite the vulture. Sandman came over and asked urgently, why don't you tell the truth? The Green Goblin's offer this time was over $100 million, so the vulture wanted to swallow the money alone, which immediately aroused their resentment, and Sandman was the member who needed the money the most. Vulture swallowed his saliva and said in a crying tone, I really didn't catch them. He now regretted his actions last night very much. Not only was he scared to death and got nothing, but now he was held accountable by his own members. Snort! You're still not telling the truth, are you? The Sandman shouted angrily. As his emotions fluctuated, the sand in the air gradually became more and more. On the other side, the mysterious man's sinister voice sounded, with the means of those little guys, you can easily catch them. You are not willing to give up your life for that money. Crackling. Bursts of electric currents continued to bloom from the shadows. Against the backdrop of the blue thunder python, the figure of the Electric King emerged from the black curtain. He nodded and said, Vulture, why don't you tell the truth? So far, the active members of the Sinister Six have all stood up, but their words are all blaming Vulture, and no one stood by him. Vulture smiled bitterly and said, I admit that I was blinded by interests. However, I also thought it was a very simple thing. So I took action in advance last night, but I really failed. Nonsense. Not to mention the 2 female members of the Fantastic Four, you can't even handle that man. Dr. Octopus thought he had exposed his lies and looked at him with a smug look on his face. That man, who else could it be if not Yan Chen? When Vulture heard his contemptuous words, he couldn't help but think of the arrogant man last night, the infinitely extending cloak, the chains that emerged from the void. These were not means that mortals could possess. Hearing Dr. Octopus's contemptuous voice, Vulture even wanted to laugh. At this moment, an idea came to his mind, and he couldn't help but say, "Since you don't believe me, well, I'll take you to him now." Yan Chen continued to study in the memory scene. This kind of memory scene is not the subjective view of the person who has this thought, but reflects an objective fact. So Yan Chen can not only read the books that he has read in the past, but also read the books read by other people in the library. In this way, he is like a sponge that constantly absorbs the magic books of Kamaji Mahal. Thanks to his enchanting and terrifying magic talent, the threshold of many magic books is basically non-existent, and Yan Chen can easily get started without much time. However, this terrifying talent also made him more or less ambitious. Not long after he started to learn the magic system of this world, he quickly jumped to how to use the power of the ancient gods. This is more or less a manifestation of the ambition of the Slytherins. Of course, this is also the decision made by Yan Chen after he realized the terrifying side of this world from Jean Grey. However, in these days, don't let his restless heart wake up slightly. There is no need for me to ascend to heaven in one step. This is not conducive to my magic foundation. Yan Chen sighed and thought. And most importantly, time is still on his side. Even Dormammu, who poses the greatest threat to him, will find it difficult to come to Earth and cause trouble for him. Therefore, there is no need for me to be so impatient. I can have a more comprehensive understanding of the magic rules and systems of the entire world. Furthermore, what determines magic is not how powerful it is, but whether it is suitable or not. At the beginning, he used the simplest strong light spell to directly expose the Shadow Girl Arya in the narrow space. The grasp of the timing and the use of the environment were just right. Thinking of this, Yan Chen couldn't help but put down the Cytoric spell in his hand, close double angle bracket, open double angle bracket. In order to fully understand the entire magic system and lay a solid foundation for his own magic, Yan Chen has gradually calmed down his restless and progressive heart and decided to read from the basics. The first is the most basic and simple, which is about the use of the elements of heaven and earth. Yan Chen's first magic book is The Use of Water Element, which is one of the elements of heaven and earth. Then he began to read about the use of earth, fire, wind and other elements. Because of the affinity of the blue dragon blood stimulated in his body for the wind element, and even the affinity of the fire element brought by the phoenix soul. So he is very good at using these 2 elements. The plasticization of the fire element, such as fireball, rocket, fire shield, hellfire, and even the summoning spell of the fire element, are all familiar to him. The plasticization of the wind element is even more of a piece of cake, and magic spells such as Wind Blade, Storm Attack, and Flying Wings are also easily mastered. Therefore, the basic heavenly law was very easy to understand for Yan Chen. Soon, his attention was already on the 2 less popular and more difficult elements. Light element, dark element. Half a day passed like this. In the living room, Yan Chen slowly started eating the food on the table. Helen and Susan were sitting beside him. Due to the frequent attacks in recent times, Helen rarely went out. She used the bedroom and even the living room as her studio. She even asked someone to bring a lot of research instruments. Since Susan graduated from Columbia University, she has been like a housewife. Besides staying at home, she goes shopping with her girlfriends. There is no sign of work. So Yan Chen looked up and asked, "Susan, aren't you going to find a job?" Hearing this, Susan put her hair behind her ears with her fingers, then smiled sweetly and said, "I already have a plan." "Right, Helen." After that, her clear and moving eyes looked at Helen. Helen nodded and said seriously, "If nothing unexpected happens, Susan and I will jointly open a research laboratory." Yan Chen was stunned. Looking at Susan's delicate and beautiful face, he remembered that she was a top student with a good IQ. Then, Helen roughly told them their plan. Yan Chen also understood it clearly at once. Basically, Helen had the regeneration cradle technology in her hands, and Susan had a considerable amount of funds in her hands. One provided technology and the other provided funds, so the two hit it off. And that money was naturally taken from Tony. By the way, after 2 transactions, Susan has become the second largest shareholder of Stark Enterprises. In addition, with a sum of hundreds of millions of dollars in funds in hand, it is more than enough to start a research laboratory. Yan Chen looked at their excited appearance and couldn't help but say, by the way, I have a lot of magic potions in my hands, which can be handed over to you for research and development. Although he himself did not understand the scientific principles, many magic potions did not have magic added, but they could be handed over to them. Helen's eyes lit up and said, is this okay? Of course, take it and use it. Seeing the two people's excitement, Yan Chen was also happy to see them act. After all, these were women who belonged to him, so it was inevitable to give them a push. Soon, as the three talked, various details were gradually finalized, and the laboratory was named Diagon Alley. Diagon Alley was originally a magical commercial street in the world where Yan Chen lived in his previous life. Now he named it like this. On the one hand, he must have hoped that the laboratory could produce various magical drugs, and on the other hand, it benefited from his poor naming skills. After a meal and the conversation between the three, time dragged on until evening. Yan Chen stretched, then picked up the clearly classified garbage bags on the ground and prepared to throw them into the trash can outside the door. Buzz. The vermilion door opened automatically without wind, in accordance with Yan Chen's wishes. Walking in the night breeze, Yan Chen couldn't help but feel refreshed. Clang. The garbage bag was thrown behind the big barrel in the community. Yan Chen slowly prepared to walk away, but at this time, a whooshing sound came from a black shadow not far away. A figure landed in front of him, and then his body kept staggering forward. He couldn't help but kneel down and said, Master, come and save me. This bruised and swollen appearance almost made Yan Chen unrecognizable, but the giant wings that were badly damaged undoubtedly exposed his identity. Vulture. Before he was even half surprised, the movement in the shadows at the street entrance attracted Yan Chen's attention. So, you brought a lot of people here. Sensing the figure approaching from the dark shadows outside, Yan Chen said bluntly to the vulture who was kneeling below. The vulture looked at the pair of motionless pupils and couldn't help but think of how he killed people without blinking that night. His heart skipped a beat, and then he quickly stood up and explained, it's them. They forced me to come here. I don't want to. Then he quickly told the whole story. In his words, he described him as a revolutionary martyr who refused to obey. If the enemy was not so vicious, he would definitely rather die generously than follow them here. Then he inadvertently praised Yan Chen's bravery. Good. Stop it. Yan Chen was speechless. He had seen how shameless this guy was. The words here were also heard clearly by the figure coming from the other side. At the street entrance, a figure slowly broke through the night. He was wearing a strange glass helmet and a purple cloak. His outfit was so gloomy and terrifying. Then a hoarse voice came from the helmet. Vulture, what are you talking about? Which side are you on? You have proven that you can't swallow the cargo, but the enemy is right in front of you, why don't you do it? Listening to these extremely cold words, Vulture shuddered, and then looked at Yan Chen's interested expression, and the whole person seemed to fall into an ice cellar, piercing his whole body. Vulture's mouth was trembling all the time. He found that he could not face this opponent again. The heroic figure that night had been completely imprinted in his mind. Then, he made up his mind and laughed at them, ha 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 ha. Unfortunately, I have now quit the Sinister Six. You are my enemy. As soon as the words fell, there were sounds coming from all the dark corners. What? It's simply treason. What are you talking about? Don't you know that this is courting death? Listening to these familiar voices, Vulture couldn't help but sweat all over, thinking of those notorious terrorist criminals. Even if they were ranked by strength, he would probably be the last. Can Yan Chen behind him withstand them? After all, no matter how strong he is only one person, and 2 fists cannot beat 4 hands. There are at least 5 people on the opposite side. Vulture has seen many superheroes die at their hands. However, when he thought of the chains that emerged from the void that night, and the infinitely expanding red cloak, he couldn't help but know in his heart that the guy behind him was not an ordinary person, and it should be a certainty to take them down. Probability. After a strong mental struggle, he still firmed up his determination. Vulture still roared at them, "Shut up. Don't you know that you will disturb my eldest brother? No, my uncle." This unrepentant insult aroused their resentment. Shouts of scolding came from the shadows. These movements attracted the attention of a family in a villa in the community. A child even poked out of the window of a villa. Yan Chen frowned slightly, then raised his left hand and pointed at the void. Buzz. Where the fingertips touched the air, substantial magic ripples were produced, and then this wave gradually spread to the entire community. Suddenly, stacked prismatic mirrors appeared and disappeared in the air. Then, it disappeared into the night sky like a dream bubble. The change was so fast, only 1 or 2 seconds, but this strange change still attracted everyone's attention, and surprised sounds were heard. How is this going? Wasn't that an illusion? Was it some kind of magic trick? Boy, it seems I was wrong. I thought you were just a pretty boy, but I didn't expect you had such means. A sinister voice burst out. It was obviously the voice of Mysterio. Although his words were full of praise, they were full of sarcasm, as if the illusion just now was nothing to him. Seeing the scene just now, Vulture couldn't help but feel a great momentum in his heart, but after hearing this cold voice, he couldn't help but get his hair on end. Mysterio. Although this guy has no superpowers, he is the enemy he least wants to face. Vulture shuddered and said to Yan Chen quickly, "Master. This is Mysterio. He can use instruments to create illusions that are so real that ordinary people can't tell the difference between the real and the fake." Before he finished speaking, his finger trembled as he pointed at the scene in front of him and said, "That's it." At this moment, there were figures at the street entrance in front of us. They were wearing the same glass helmets, the same purple capes, and the same appearance and figure. They were obviously the mysterious man. Click. The sound of footsteps continued to come from the shadows of the night, and then the figures of the mysterious man continued to break through the night and entered everyone's eyes. Obviously, in everyone's logical thinking, it was definitely an illusion. However, these resonant footsteps and these three-dimensional figures undoubtedly brought everyone terrifying pressure. Ah, this is one of his abilities. He is a movie special effects master, so he has a lot of weapons. Vulture gritted his teeth and tried to remain calm to interpret for Yan Chen. Ha ha ha, but the mysterious men on the opposite side laughed sinisterly at the same time. Soon, an endless number of people came out from the night. In a blink of an eye, the number reached hundreds. In a short while, it reached several hundred. Then, one after another, the mysterious men made a voice and said, "Surrender. Kneel down on the ground." Before he finished speaking, a sound like burning wood could be heard. At the same time, a figure appeared directly from the air. Before he could completely stand in front of a mysterious man, his right hand could not help but slap him hard. Boom! A violent muffled sound suddenly resounded throughout the night sky. A mysterious man's body was slapped down by his fist, and a pit suddenly appeared on the ground, with a blurry flesh and blood appearing inside. Only the glass and the purple clothes could tell who this person was. Yan Chen slowly put away his right hand and said lightly, "You are so long-winded." Then, the lingering sounds around stopped abruptly, and the figures of the mysterious men were constantly blurring and distorted. The three-dimensional figures eventually disappeared under the guidance of the lost real body. Less than a breath, just a light blow, the mysterious man's growing army was destroyed in the blink of an eye. Because the speed was too fast, the vulture over there continued to explain the weakness of his holographic imaging device. Ah, this. Hearing the roar, he looked at Yan Chen who appeared in front of him, and his jaw dropped open. All disappeared. How could there be any human figures in the huge and powerful army before him? After being shocked, a feeling of excitement quickly filled Vulture's heart. He knew that he had made the right bet. Ha! Yan Chen exhaled lightly, and then said, "Fake. Is this the kind of person? The illusion trick just now may be enough to fool others, but under the perception of the Phoenix soul, no illusion can be hidden from him." So even if his real body was hidden in the crowd, he was pulled out by Yan Chen in an instant. Boom! A flame spread out from under his feet. Then the pool of flesh and blood in the pit instantly melted and dissolved under the watering of the Phoenix flames. You You actually killed the mysterious man. You were looking for death. Hand on. The sudden death instantly aroused the indignation of the members of the Evil Six. Roar. A terrifying roar came from the sky. The sudden explosion was so loud that the vulture's heart skipped a beat. At the same time, he couldn't help but think of the ferocious and terrifying monster and said, "Venom." The roar came from far away and was so clear that it floated into the ears. Looking at the figure flying in the air like a cannonball, with bursts of breaking air sounds. Yan Chen was not in a hurry. He stood in place and silently stared at the flying giant figure. Then his pair of black eyes turned red inexplicably, as if a ball of fire was burning in his pupils. Then, boom, along with the changes in the pupils, the giant figure in the air that was still hidden in the night suddenly burned into a huge fireball, accompanied by bursts of heart-wrenching roars. Yan Chen just said lightly, "The godly blade has no shadow." Buzz. A gust of wind blew inexplicably in the air. Then, a series of sounds like fingers plucking a zither kept splashing out. Whoosh, whoosh. Under the lingering wind, the invisible sharp blade instantly cut the burning venom frequently. Ah! The terrifying screams became louder and louder, and the figure in the air fell to the ground like a kite with a broken string. Yan Chen ignored it because the enemy had arrived. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The sand and dust in the air suddenly filled the entire space. The sky was full of yellow sand. It was about to cover people's eyes. The sight in the entire pupil was suddenly filled with a sandy color, and the sound of sand and gravel colliding kept lingering in the ears. But in an instant, Yan Chen's entire figure was afraid that he would be submerged in the sand and dust. In this overwhelming yellow sand, a human face actually emerged from the sand, and he said viciously, "It's here." Yan Chen was neither annoyed nor angry, and still did not move a single step, but slowly raised his hands. Buzz. A gust of wind suddenly lingered around his body. Wind is invisible and intangible, but under Yan Chen's use of elements, it seemed to be real, showing a light blue color, not only forming a wind shield to block the sand and gravel from the outside. Then, relying on this wind force, the surrounding dust was gradually gathered and wrapped up. But the Sandman's notoriety is not in vain, but he went with the flow, and with the help of the gathered sand and dust, he stood on the ground and formed a huge sand giant as big as a mountain. Die! The sand giant roared, and his fist as big as a courtyard pillar suddenly attacked, stirring up gusts of wind, which was extremely terrifying. I don't like looking up at others. Looking at the figure as tall as a hill, Yan Chen wanted to review the elemental magic, but gave up for the time being. Then he gently uttered a spell, "Shrink quickly." Invisible magic waves spread to the giant's body. This was also the first time he used the magnification and reduction spell in this world. Then, the terrifying fist that gradually occupied the field of vision in front of him, unexpectedly, continued to shrink as it got closer. In less than a breath, the whole giant was even more exaggerated, shrinking into the shape of an adult. Looking at the body that was much shorter than himself, Yan Chen slowly stretched out his right hand, but just when he just put it on the fist extended by the Sandman. Zzz. An even more terrifying sound of electricity burst out beside his ears. Bang! Then a muffled loud noise came from around his body. The Electric King opened his eyes wide. He had just appeared next to Yan Chen's body with lightning speed and almost teleported. He thought that his fist could hit his handsome face, but he didn't expect it actually hit this red cloak. The Electric King gritted his teeth, and a huge force surged in his arm again, and the force was much stronger, but the cloak cloth in front of him did not move at all. Is this a mistake? A slight roar came from the Electric King's heart. On the other side, Yan Chen's right hand had completely rested on the Sandman's fist, and then a terrifying icy force climbed up his entire right arm, and then quickly spread to his whole body. No, Den-O came at the critical moment just to save Sandman, but he didn't expect that he was still a step too late. Don't worry, it's your turn now. After the magic cloak fluttered, Yan Chen's figure appeared, and his extraordinary face immediately caught his eye. The Electric King was nervous, and a warning sound came from his heart. This instinct told him to run away quickly, but his feet seemed to be glued to the ground, and he couldn't move at all. It's actually stuck to the ground. The Electric King looked down at his legs, and saw a layer of petrified skin spreading all over his body. His pupils couldn't help but shrink. When did this happen? Wandless spellcasting. Silent spell. This was the symbol of Yan Chen's previous life as a high-level wizard. He did it silently and unconsciously, without even knowing that he was under a spell. Click. The sound of footsteps was heard on the ground. Yan Chen finally took a step forward from where he was, and just where he was just now, he knocked down most of the members one after another without any effort. As his figure gradually walked away, the king of electricity behind him suddenly turned into a petrified sculpture, which contrasted with the ice sculpture next to it. The vulture over there suddenly let out an excited exclamation and said, "He, I told you not to be nosy." The king of electricity was originally a substitute member of their organization. According to the vulture's idea, maybe he was found by Dr. Octopus to replace him. Seeing that this rampant substitute also encountered a disaster, he couldn't help but reveal his iconic laughter again. Yan Chen walked leisurely on the road in the community, and the roar just now had already stopped. After all, in just a minute or so, several combat forces were lost, so the remaining hunters Craven and Dr. Octopus had no intention of continuing to fight. Whoosh! With a whistling sound that broke through the air, the voice of the vulture came from far to near, "Don't even think about running." Looking at the figure that came quickly, Dr. Octopus couldn't help but said in surprise, You lackey." After saying that, the mechanical arm on his back could not help but shoot towards the sky. Swish, swish. Although he was called a lackey, Vulture was secretly happy in his heart. After all, he had completely joined the team. With a pulse gun in his hand, he could not help but fight with Dr. Octopus below. Yan Chen glanced at him out of the corner of his eye, and then continued to walk towards the road ahead. In a pit not far away, a ball of fire was still burning slowly. The black viscous substance that looked like liquid actually stretched out tiny tentacles that kept clinging to the ground, trying to break free from the phoenix flames. Yan Chen couldn't help but look over again, and a flame suddenly rose in his black eyes, and then this ball of black viscous liquid inexplicably rose with a flame. The phoenix fireworks suddenly became violent. The whole air could not help but heat up a lot, and then this mass of black viscous substance completely melted and dissipated, leaving only wisps of black smoke in the air. Click. Yan Chen did not stop and continued to walk to the street entrance. Because he knew that there was still a figure lurking in the shadows, like the most experienced hunter, patiently waiting for the prey to come. Click. Another footstep. And Yan Chen seemed to have touched some kind of identification sensor device, and a violent explosion shock wave suddenly sprayed out from the micro-explosives on the wall. Boom! The fierce flames bared their fangs and claws, as if they had opened their bloody mouths, trying to completely devour Yan Chen. Bang! The violent collision sound came. It was the sound of the shock wave wrapped in flames colliding with the protective shield lingering around Yan Chen's body. Yan Chen, who was safe and sound, slowly stepped out of the sea of fire. Every step he took would even cause the flames on the ground to automatically move away, just like Moses parting the sea. Is that all you have? Yan Chen had just finished speaking. With two whooshing sounds, two spider webs were sprayed from a tall building nearby. The webs were made of extremely elastic fibers, enough to make people helpless. This was also the inspiration that Hunter had drawn from Spider-Man. However, zzz, a burst of fire rose up inexplicably in the air again, instantly burning the spider webs. While still in the air, it was completely burned out and turned into wisps of ash. Hunter Craven's pupils shrank, and he said inwardly, "What a monster." Then, his body left quietly and silently, but he did not plan to escape or retreat, but chose to run towards a duplex apartment. This is also his hunter's law. The weakness of the strong is often not limited to his body, but also his family. Noticed that he was moving towards his home. Yan Chen sighed silently, looking for death. Looking for trouble with his own family, he had already sentenced him to death in his heart. Then, after a gust of wind blew, the whole person's figure quickly dissipated in place. At the same time, a wisp of magic fluctuation suddenly spread from Craven's back. Run! Suddenly, there was a sound in Hunter Craven's mind, and he was alert in his heart. This was his life instinct that he had practiced for many years, but where was the enemy? Back. An answer emerged in his heart. After all, in his hunter's rules, there is also a rule not to expose your back to the enemy. So it is obvious that the back is indeed the most unexpected and deadly place to attack. Thinking of this, he turned around suddenly, holding a sharp curved blade in his hand, flashing a cold light in the night. At this time, Yan Chen's figure had just emerged half of his body from the air. Obviously, Craven's instinctive reaction was extremely strong. He actually turned Yan Chen's sudden sneak attack into his powerful sneak attack. Whoosh! The sound of breaking through the air continued to come from the sharp blade, and the sharp whimpering sound was enough to move people and make them extremely piercing. Looking at the sharp blade that was about to pierce his entire head, Hunter Craven couldn't help but outline a smile. This guy was finally going to be taken down by him. Bang! Suddenly, a muffled sound interrupted the illusion in his mind. Then, unbearable pain came from his right arm, causing the Hunter Craven to scream in pain. Ah! Crack! Yan Chen's hand could not help but twist, and then the arm twisted like a twisted vine, and the sharp blade in the palm of his hand could no longer be held, and fell to the ground with a clang. Ah! Hunter Craven screamed again, his pupils filled with panic and disbelief. Too fast! Too fast! What he could not have imagined was that his arm would fall into his palm in an instant. Is this still a speed that the human body can achieve? At this time, Yan Chen held the attacking arm and revealed his complete body from the ripples in the air. Although the attack just now was unexpected, it was still too slow for his dragon body. At this moment, the black pupils completely transformed into strange golden vertical pupils, and then a blood force surged into his body and flowed through his arm. Crack! The whole arm was pulled down by him. Then, Yan Chen followed his falling body and fiercely the octopus stepped on the ground with a pop sound, and the whole huge head suddenly burst like a watermelon, and red and white dirty things were scattered all over the ground. He didn't show much mercy to those who dared to attack the people around him. Buzz! A flame also burned on his body. Then, Yan Chen's sight turned to the two people who were fighting fiercely over there. Although relying on the air advantage, the vulture still couldn't get any advantage from the octopus's claws, and even left a lot of scars on his body. Yan Chen was silent, and waved his right hand slightly. A ripple passed through the air. Then, the mighty Dr. Octopus inexplicably slowed down his movements. At this time, the vulture had a chance to take advantage of it and cut his body in an instant. Blood immediately spurted out from Dr. Octopus' body. Jihieji. After the vulture succeeded in the attack, he let out a ferocious laugh and then raised his entire body. After the attack just now, his two claws and even the huge wings behind him were all stained with blood. This was the tearing power that could easily destroy the tree trunk, so the attack just now was not light. Ah! Dr. Octopus let out a cry of pain. The two mechanical tentacles on his back were pulled out by the roots, and there were several hideous and horrible wounds on his body. You are an ungrateful beast. Beast! Vulture cursed angrily. The grudge between the two of them had already been there. After all, this guy had already replaced his identity, otherwise he would not have been prepared to swallow the Green Goblin's huge sum of money alone. Whoosh! Die! Beat the drowned dog! Vulture slid down again instantly. After losing two mechanical tentacles, Dr. Octopus suddenly lost his powerful means of counterattack. After a while, the whole person was hit by the tearing claws again, and there were more blood marks. Too slow. Yan Chen's voice came faintly. The vulture's previous smug look suddenly disappeared, and then he gritted his teeth, and then his whole body was like a thunder, swooping down on Dr. Octopus. The two of them quickly fought, and after paying two hideous wounds, this ferocious bird finally took Dr. Octopus's life. Looking at the bloody hole that pierced his body, Dr. Octopus fell to the ground with a cry. Afterwards, his body also ignited a phoenix fire. When Yan Chen was about to destroy the remaining two frozen and petrified bodies, Vulture gritted his teeth and stood up and said, "The King of Electric is unforgivable, but this Sandman is a really good man. He just wants to treat his relatives for money." Vulture took into account their friendship to some extent. He got along well with him in the organization, and he knew his personality very well. And I also saw that brother. No, you want to live a normal life, but you are being targeted by someone with ulterior motives. Don't worry, we will find the Green Goblin this time, and there must be some dirty work for us to do. Listening to the words of self-recommendation to be his subordinate, there was no emotion on Yan Chen's face. Instead, he looked at him with interest and said, "Okay, I will spare your life and Sandman's life for now, but the next task is not only to lure out the Green Goblin, but also an important task, which is to harm the Osborn group. Ah! A cold sweat broke out on Vulture's face. Although he knew that such a big shot would do some dirty work and dirty his hands, he didn't expect that the first thing he would do was to harm the Osborn group. Osborn Group. It was one of the country's super large multinational companies. The market value of hundreds of billions of dollars could not be harmed casually. This was undoubtedly an egg hitting a stone, right? But looking at Yan Chen's confident face, Vulture knew that it was not a joke. But when he thought that this might be a token of his allegiance, he gritted his teeth and said, "I'll take it." Very good. Yan Chen said this meaningfully, but he spared the life of the Sandman, and then completely destroyed the Electric King who had been petrified into a sculpture. Then, he waved his right hand at the sky with ease, and suddenly pieces of sharp-edged mirrors appeared around the entire night sky, stacked in a circle, like a dream. "Disperse," Yan Chen said softly. Crack. The mirror surface suddenly showed cracks, and then it collapsed, and the entire mirror space suddenly dissipated. Yan Chen and others returned to the real world. What happened inside was not enough for outsiders to know. Vulture and Sandman had already left as companions. As for how they discussed their future livelihoods and how Vulture persuaded Sandman, Yan Chen would not pay much attention or care. As for the matter assigned to them, it was also their token of allegiance. After all, he did need some people to do some dirty work, and he couldn't do everything himself. The most important thing was that with Susan and the others setting up a research laboratory and even a company, they would inevitably encounter a lot of troubles in the future, so this was also a precaution. And why did he choose Osborn? That was also because the Osborn group once wanted to send someone to invite him to physical experiments, and then, the Green Goblin asked the Sinister Six to capture himself and others. Unlike the Brotherhood of Mutants who came for Helen, the Sinister Six a target includes himself. Although I don't know who the Green Goblin is. But there is no doubt that the Green Goblin may have some connection with the Osborn group. Well, it's just a possibility, but it's enough. For Yan Chen, as long as there is a motive of suspicion, it is enough. And with Osborn's butler Druck, and the mercenaries he met in the underground tunnel, he has a very low impression of the entire Osborn family. So there is the matter I entrusted just now, but if the Osborn group is harassed and harmed, the rumored Green Goblin still comes out to stop it. Then congratulations to them. Yan Chen's last bit of doubt will disappear. Soon, Yan Chen arrived at the door of a duplex apartment. With a sound of soft noises, he had already entered a room. Pink wall stickers and a group of fluffy dolls were placed in the cupboard. It was obvious that this was not Yan Chen's home at all. Even Susan did not decorate the room in such a pink tone, which was so girly. "I didn't mean to scare you," Yan Chen said very gentlemanly. A little girl on the couch tightly grasped the sheets. Seeing the sudden intruder, she was shocked, but she was full of surprise and said, "Are you the magician just now? Didn't it hurt you?" This cute little girl was just outside the window and saw what happened. That's why Yan Chen noticed it and then used the mirror space. He wanted to cast the oblivion spell on her. But looking at this little girl, Yan Chen was stunned for a long time. Until the little girl's face turned red, it was not because of him. It's Lolita control. It's because Yan Chen was the first child with wizard talent in this world. A child who has the ability to practice the magic system of his previous life. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but say, "What's your name?" The little loli pondered for a while before saying crisply, "Emma." "Emma, what a nice name." Yan Chen smiled silently. The delicate little girl in front of him had a beautiful face. She would probably be a blonde beauty comparable to Susan when she grows up. Yan Chen sighed, looking at the very calm little girl. He couldn't help but retract his previous thoughts and said to her, "Don't tell your parents about what happened just now." The confused girl nodded frequently like a chicken pecking at rice, and then stretched out her finger, hook. "Okay." Yan Chen followed her action and also stretched out his finger to hook it. Then the two of them exchanged greetings for a while. After all, Emma was a curious little girl who kept asking about magic. Yan Chen also patiently answered her one by one. After a while, Yan Chen left with peace of mind. Strolling on the road in the community, although Yan Chen wanted to take in a disciple and carry forward his magic from another world, he thought of Emma's young age and how to explain it to her parents, so he gave up for the time being. But in his heart, he planned to come to her after a while. Back in front of the vermilion gate of the duplex villa, Yan Chen looked back silently and waved amiably. Hand, diagonally opposite, in front of the window of a duplex villa, a little girl waved reluctantly. Buzz. The door opened by itself. Yan Chen entered the room again. It had been more than half an hour since he went out to take out the trash. During this period, he even solved the Evil Six and discovered a female magic apprentice. It was a big gain. The evening breeze drifted in from the window. Susan and Helen in the living room were still discussing the specific plan for the laboratory. After Yan Chen smiled at them, he returned to the meditation room and continued to practice and study the power of the elements of heaven and earth. The night passed just like this. When he woke up again, Yan Chen had already opened his eyes from the couch, and a gleam of light flashed in his pupils. In his field of vision, the entire invisible air was suddenly filled with elements of various colors: red, blue, green, and blue. There are all kinds of colors, and the dark matter emerging from the shadows as the dark element. Yan Chen sighed, closed his eyes again and then slowly opened them, and the vision in his pupils returned to normal. Putting aside the results of last night's practice in his mind, feeling the faint fragrance in the air, Yan Chen could not help but follow this breath and hugged Susan beside him. Warm and soft, refreshing, a trace of restlessness in his heart was instantly ignited. Then, the two bodies slowly pressed together and warmed each other. In this way, the whole morning passed by easily and happily. In the living room, Helen tilted her jade slightly. She held a mobile phone in her slender and smooth fingers, listening attentively to the information coming from the call, nodding and replying from time to time. Susan, who had just stood up opposite her, was wearing a loose pajamas and a pair of hot pants underneath, revealing a large part of her beautiful shoulders and collarbones, and her slender long legs. At home, her clothes were very casual. However, at this time, Susan's eyes were filled with worry as she looked at Helen. Beep. The sound of the end of the call was heard. Susan's words came, "How is it?" This morning, several calls came in a row, which naturally made Susan, who was warm in the bedroom, get up in a hurry, wanting to understand the clues of the matter. Helen motioned her to rest assured and said, "It was from S.H.I.E.L.D. earlier, and it was the X-Force who called. It's nothing, the main thing is that they learned about the accident on the road last time. The last time the saber-toothed tiger suddenly attacked on the road, it was the second terrorist attack on Helen. This time, S.H.I.E.L.D. called, in addition to asking some relevant details and condolences, the most important thing was to invite Helen to join them. But Helen still directly declined. The second call was from the ex-police, and they told Helen some important information. Helen sighed, her delicate face filled with a trace of worry. "I finally know why the Brotherhood of Mutants attacked me. First of all, it's because their leader Magneto has a gene radiation machine that can mutate ordinary people into mutants." "Ah," Susan couldn't help but exclaimed in surprise. "Turning ordinary people into mutants? There is such a machine. Wouldn't it be able to completely eliminate the so-called ordinary people and solve the entire racial discrimination problem? But even so, their brotherhood shouldn't cause trouble to you." Susan pointed out the doubts. Yan Chen, who was wearing a bathrobe, couldn't help but sit on the sofa with interest after hearing this. Helen's brows were still worried, and after looking at Yan Chen, her heart was inexplicably relieved, and then she explained, "The important thing is that this machine requires a lot of energy, and it may even cause the operator to lose his life. That's why Magneto came to me. He needs someone who can absorb energy to operate the machine on his behalf." So that's it. Susan finally understood the reason. Her pretty face turned cold and she said angrily, "That old man wants you to die. And, doesn't that mean the Brotherhood's attacks will come again? Last time in the laboratory. And once on the way home. Each time they appeared, although they were saved, they were accompanied by the death of several innocent lives, which made Susan very angry." Yan Chen hugged Susan and motioned her to be at ease. Helen calmed her breath and said, "The good news is that the Brotherhood's attacks should come to an end for the time being. But the bad news is that an innocent mutant little girl has replaced herself. She also has similar abilities. Not only that, her abilities are more useful for the radiation machine." Susan didn't know whether she was happy or disappointed when she heard this. After a long time, she sighed, "Oh." Suddenly she thought, Magneto is ready for everything. Then who is his target? Helen shook her head and said, I don't know yet, but the ex-police are still looking for his target. Listening to Helen's words, combining some fragments of Mystique's memory, Yan Chen may have known the general arrangement. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but reveal an unfathomable smile and said, maybe I already know it roughly. So ladies, please come to the dance party tomorrow. A global summit was being held on a small island in New York. The participants were all leaders and young talents from around the world. It can be said that the powerful people in the world accounted for more than half of them. So it's a good place to start. Yan Chen was dressed in a black suit, holding the hand of a beautiful woman. Although Helen's delicate face was smiling, her eyebrows were still gloomy. Looking at the social elites who came to play next to her, she said, Magneto really knows how to choose a place. If he succeeds, then this group of people in front of him will be. Although he didn't finish his words, Yan Chen naturally understood that if all the powerful people on Earth were turned into mutants, it would be a joke. According to Magneto's idea, in addition to retaliating against these people, he also intended to let mutants rule the world. But although the idea is good, according to Helen's conclusion from a professional perspective, he has the radiation machine can turn ordinary people into mutants, but after a certain period of time, their genes will not be able to withstand such mutations and they will burst and die. Therefore, Magneto's plan to transform mutants this time may undoubtedly cause a massacre, and this massacre may also radiate to the entire city of New York. The two of them whispered to each other. After all, handsome men and beautiful women attracted many people to look back silently. With so many eyes intertwined, Helen's pretty face couldn't help but turn red, not because of them, but because of the man holding her arm. You're lucky, Helen said a little proudly. It was the first time they stood so close to each other since their frank conversation on the balcony. Listening to her mosquito-like words, Yan Chen smiled at each other. Helen happened to be the representative of this global summit, and Susan went back to her parents' home for something, so this mission brought the two together. Soon, a voice came from the summit. I would like to thank Mr. President again for hosting this grand event in New York City. We are also honored to have invited representatives of the global social elite. After a lengthy thank you speech, with a bang, fireworks rose from the stage and turned into the most brilliant fireworks in the sky. The action was about to begin. Okay, I'll send it here. Yan Chen let go of Helen's hand and motioned her to go back. The two of them came to the outside of the venue. The depression between Helen's eyebrows was still there, and it had been like this since she arrived today. At this moment, her eyes were full of ripples, and she looked at Yan Chen with worry. It was no wonder that Helen was so worried. After all, Yan Chen was going to fight Magneto this time, and there was bound to be a risk to his life. If he was not careful, he might. And this was more or less due to the challenge caused by herself. Thinking of this, Helen couldn't help but make up her mind secretly. Looking at her responsible mood, Yan Chen also knew that he understood her worries, but smiled and said, It's okay. It's nothing. Before he finished speaking, a fragrant breeze blew in his nose, and the fragrance and softness of jade hit him in his arms. Before he could really feel the warmth of the skin, the person in his arms stood on tiptoe and suddenly kissed Yan Chen on the lips. Just like a dragonfly touching the water. It was like an illusion. But the smooth touch, and even the sweetness floating in the mouth and tongue, was a lingering aftertaste that could not be cut off. After the touch, the body temperature in his arms had disappeared completely. Looking at Helen, who was already a few meters away from him, Yan Chen couldn't help but come back to his senses from his surprise, and he more or less knew the intention of her action. Come back alive. Helen's face was flushed, and she dared not even look directly at him. She lowered her head and looked at her toes, saying shyly, Of course, thinking of you, how could I bear not to come back? Yan Chen said with a smile. This love talk made Helen feel embarrassed. Then the two smiled at each other and nodded tacitly. Bang! The fireworks in the distance were lit again. Looking at the bright and colorful fireworks ignited in the sky, Yan Chen also knew that time was running out. Okay, I should go now. Yan Chen waved his hand, and then, as Helen watched, he slowly disappeared into the shadows. Helen sighed and watched the man disappear from her sight. The redness on her face still did not fade. When she thought about how she took the initiative to kiss him and lost her virginity, her face turned even redder. As a city bordering the ocean and with the Hudson River flowing through it, New York has many unique islands. In addition to the island chosen for the global summit, there is even an island called Liberty Island not far away. Liberty Island. Just hearing the name of this island, basically no one will feel familiar, but if you hear the name of the Statue of Liberty, I believe everyone must have been very clear. That's right, the tall bronze statue of the Statue of Liberty was built on this isolated island. As the ripples in the air continued to float, click, the sound of footsteps landing could not help but come. A figure appeared from the void, and as the invisible waves continued to spread, the whole person's figure landed smoothly on Liberty Island. Yan Chen shook his head and looked at the huge Statue of Liberty, then kept looking up and stood on the dazzling crown of the statue of the goddess. Then his sight shifted to the torch in the hands of the statue of the goddess. And it just so happened that Magneto's machine was built on that top. In the sky, a snow-white owl spread its feathers and flew high in the sky. Then, feeling the vibrations from below, it could not help but slide down in a curve with joy. Coo coo coo, Owl Kelly called out, and then landed steadily on his shoulder. This morning, she had returned to him, and brought him good news, that is, another Horcrux had been found. The location was a little far away, so she didn't have much time to wander around. At this time, she had just returned and was used to monitor Magneto's actions, and she couldn't help but cooing in Yan Chen's ear to express her dissatisfaction. Okay, a snack for dinner. Yan Chen comforted her for a while. Then, he was ready to meet Magneto on the goddess statue. But before that, Yan Chen smiled and made a few gestures with his right hand, and then a magic circle appeared. He grasped the void with his hand. When ripples appeared in the air, a lady's figure was pulled out from somewhere by Yan Chen. Okay, Mystique, I'll show you a show. Right in the interior of the Statue of Liberty. A group of people had already arrived here before Yan Chen arrived, and they kept climbing up from the museum below to the heights, trying to stop Magneto's actions. Clang clang, a series of piercing sounds continuously came from the twisted steel bars. Bang, with a violent bang, the metal chains, like silver snakes, locked the four people directly to the wall. The offensive of both sides ended, and it was only a few seconds before they launched their attacks. Humph, this is the X-Men, and a monkey. Magneto looked at them with great contempt, and then his gaze stayed on Wolverine's face for a while, and his tone became even more serious. Ah, Magneto, I'm going to kill you. Wolverine gritted his teeth, his violent temper causing his body to swell and exert force, but the metal chains that bound him were so strong that he couldn't move at all. In addition to Storm and Cyclops, Jean Grey was also imprisoned. Jean Grey was imprisoned on the wall and could not move. As the most talented person among them, although she had the power of the Phoenix, she could not use it at all. Facing Magneto's metal manipulation, she could only do nothing. Ah, Logan's roar continued to resound. Because they failed, it meant that Rogue would die, and the radiation fluctuations would spread to the entire summit and even New York. Magneto ignored his roar. Wolverine's adamantium body, which was invincible, was simply a joke in his eyes. After all, who said he was the master of metal? After looking at them meaningfully for the last time, he walked out of the room, and the Toad on the side came towards him. Magneto looked at him and couldn't help but say, Sabretooth and Mystique, still no news. Toad shook his head and said apologetically, still haven't received any news. Opening the radiation machine requires too much energy from the individual, and one may even die from it if not careful. So Magneto needs a scapegoat. The little rascal who can absorb the abilities of others, and Helen who can absorb the energy of others, immediately come to his mind. So, in order to ensure the success of the operation, the entire Brotherhood is divided into two groups, one led by Magneto himself to capture the little rascal. The other group is led by Mystique and Sabretooth to capture Helen. But unexpectedly, since the second time they went to capture Helen, the two people disappeared and completely lost contact. What's going on? Magneto had a feeling in his heart, are they all dead? A sense of crisis that something bad is going to happen suddenly emerged in his mind, and he couldn't hold it back no matter how hard he tried. No, Mystique's timeline is wrong. During the second capture, Sabretooth was alone, but Mystique went to Xavier's school for the gifted. Toad added. Magneto suddenly realized that before this, he personally gave Mystique a task, asking her to go to the school and tamper with the brainwave enhancement machine, so that Professor Charles, who was using the machine, would be paralyzed and fall into a coma. That means, Sabretooth went to capture Helen alone that night, and disappeared completely that night. Then Mystique went to investigate Sabretooth's whereabouts, but she also disappeared after that. That's right, Toad sighed secretly, probably knowing in his heart that they had met with misfortune. Very good. The problem lies with Dr. Zhao Helen. Magneto gritted his teeth. Those were his two favorite generals. What was even more hateful was that Dr. Helen's ability reminded him of someone, the Black Emperor. It was the Black Emperor who influenced his life. The death of both parents, the broken family, the nightmare childhood, and the rough adulthood were all caused by him. Thinking of this guy's ability reappearing on a woman, Magneto hated him even more. Zhao Helen. Very good. I remember your name. Thinking of his own men who disappeared inexplicably under her hands, Magneto has sentenced her to death in his heart, and is ready to go there in person to end her life after this mission. Toad looked at the hatred on Magneto's face, and knew that the woman was in trouble. After all, no one can escape from Magneto's clutches. At this time, a high-pitched shout came from below. It was the sound of the red tank in the museum at the bottom. Toad couldn't help but listen to the movement underground. His ability enhanced his hearing a little, and then he said happily, Mystique. She's back. Statue of Liberty. The foundation stone at the foot of the statue is a museum, where there are items specially for tourists to visit. After the Brotherhood of Mutants occupied the statue, the entire museum underneath naturally fell into their hands. As for the security guards who were guarding the venue, they had already turned into a pool of pus and blood. Tap. The sound of hurried footsteps could not help but come from the door. A trace of extremely heavy breathing sounds, from far to near, continued to be transmitted into the museum. This slight movement instantly caused the members of the Brotherhood to be highly alert. Many of them even took a fighting stance, and among them, a strong man wearing an iron helmet and with a body like a small hill stood up. As he stood up, the whole ground even trembled. Ho ho ho. The heavy breathing sound had reached the entrance of the museum. Was it a woman's voice? Everyone looked at each other in confusion. It shouldn't be an enemy who could make such a revealing sound. Then, the figure soon entered the entrance of the museum. The blue and charming skin, the fine scales, and the slender figure clearly showed that this was their member, Mystique. Everyone's guard was instantly relaxed, and even a look of surprise appeared in their hearts. Mystique is not missing. Even the red tank, who was so serious just now, laughed out loud, and shouted Mystique's name in celebration. The whole museum was suddenly filled with his thunderous voice. But, compared to everyone's joy, Mystique had a look of fear on her face. This look of fear as if she was facing a formidable enemy made everyone's heart beat fast. What was going on? Mystique couldn't say a complete sentence for a long time, but she found that she couldn't reveal any information about that person. Thinking of this, the fear spread deeper in her heart. Finally, she said in a sad tone, "Run. Run." Mystique's heart-wrenching voice echoed throughout the museum. Instantly, everyone in the room fell silent, and the atmosphere suddenly fell into a peaceful state. At the same time, a trace of fear rose in their hearts. What on earth could have made the experienced Mystique so scared, to the point of asking everyone to run away? Well, Mystique tried again and again, but because of the ceiling pliers, she couldn't reveal any information about Yan Chen. Then she looked at the people who were still stunned and said with great sorrow, "If you don't listen to me, give it to me now." Before she finished her words, a sound of footsteps suddenly echoed at the door. At the same time, Mystique's words suddenly stopped, and her body even trembled. Another footstep fell. Mystique even found that her heart skipped a beat. Then she slowly turned around, pointed at the door with a trembling finger and said, "It's he." Emotions are contagious. Everyone in the museum was frightened by the fear on Mystique's face. At this time, they could not help but follow her line of sight and slowly look at the figure gradually appearing at the door. Wearing a red cloak, a slender figure, and an extraordinary face, everything seemed to be an ordinary young man. How could Mystique be so crazy without supernatural powers? At this moment, a member who was still shocked just now looked at the figure at the door and felt relieved. I thought it was a monster. Then, a burst of energy burst out. A pit suddenly appeared on the ground, and the figure of the whole person shot straight at the young man in front of him like a cannonball. Die. Well, boom. A muffled loud noise suddenly came. The entire figure that rushed over unexpectedly hit a wall of air and could not move forward even a little bit. Yan Chen in front of him showed an impeccable smile, slowly grabbed his hair with one hand. Then he threw it hard on the ground in front of him. Boom! Another loud noise, accompanied by the sound of bones breaking, sounded on the ground. In the pit that looked like a meteorite crater, the figure lying there showed a distorted shape, and soon, a layer of blood filled the pit. Ha! Yan Chen gently exhaled a breath, but the airflow was faintly present in the air. He loosened the small tuft of hair in the palm of his hand, then stood up and said, "Kill the wrong person." Everyone was in an uproar. Seeing that the boy in front of him was no longer the same as before, especially the pair of strange golden vertical pupils, every time he looked at him, a feeling of fear could not help but grab his heart. Where did this monster come from? Ah! Mystique wailed. Seeing the scene just now, she collapsed instantly. She thought that this boy was just a weird wizard. Now that move just now undoubtedly showed his terrifying flesh and blood strength. As a result, she was even more frightened. Thinking back to what he said at that time, twist off Magneto's head, which she thought was just a joke, Mystique was now half sure in her heart. Arrogant. A rude voice came from beside him. It was the red tank that made the sound, and then the muscles like granite continued to swell, and the bones in the body made a sound like frying beans. The momentum rose and condensed for a time, although it brought a certain amount of pressure to everyone, and their breathing could not help but suffocate. However, the guy in front of him was a member of the Brotherhood, and this made his restless heart calm instantly. Get him, Juggernaut, use your giant fist to smash him into pulp. The crowd cheered. Juggernaut's flesh and blood strength is one of the best among mutants. Even saber-toothed tigers can't compete with him. Perhaps only the Hulk can be compared with him in the world today. So it's no wonder they cheered so much. Yan Chen looked at the muscular little giant in front of him and was slightly surprised. It was not because of the bulging iron lumps on his body, but because he smelled a familiar magical breath in it. I see. Yan Chen observed for a while and realized that the magical energy flowing in his body came from Starak. It was inexhaustible and could be regarded as a terrifying bulldozer. Looking at this guy with unparalleled strength, Yan Chen softly chanted a spell, Mother Earth who gave birth to life. As the words suddenly appeared. Bang! A muffled sound of footsteps suddenly came from the ground. Boom, boom, boom. One step after another, loud noises like muffled thunder continued to come from the ground. The figure of Red Tank instantly came directly from not far away. Every step he took not only raised a large cloud of dust, but also left a series of sunken pits. The running speed he started even blew up a storm around. Mystique's slender figure was inevitably blown away by the wind. Her pair of pupils full of fear looked at the terrifying Red Tank in front of her, and she couldn't help but be filled with a hint of surprise. Perhaps, Red Tank could destroy him. But looking at Yan Chen who was standing there calmly, the hint of surprise in Mystique's heart dissipated, and then she ran out quickly. She actually ignored Magneto, and ran out directly from the back door alone. Quote. Respond to my call and bury the sin before my eyes. As Red Tank ran closer to him, Yan Chen finished the spell perfectly. Looking at Yan Chen who was so close in front of him, Red Tank's face was full of ferocity. He even recalled the scene of the blood plasma bursting in his mind. Then, he stepped down with his last foot. Puff! There was no solid sound coming from the landing, but it was like falling into water, sinking into a sticky liquid substance. Puff! Soon the whole person completely lost balance and fell into a pool of muddy swamp. When, the ground in front of him turned into a pool of horrible mud swamp. Ah! Red Tank roared, and most of his huge body was sunk. Moreover, this fall has not stopped yet, and there is nothing to support his feet, so he can't vent his strength at all. Yan Chen looked at the heavy guy in front of him who kept hitting the cement, and couldn't help but uttered again, entangle. Invisible magic power fluctuations once again spread from this sudden swamp. Puff! Red earth pythons suddenly flew out of the swamp, and then wrapped around Red Tank's body and limbs like chains. The property change of the earth element, and plasticization. A review lesson. Have fun, everyone. Yan Chen then ignored him and walked towards the stunned people in front of him. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.